Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back to the venue. I think we are ready to start our second session. Is everybody's back? I think Puncada has some media interview, ya. Sebelahnya Mbak Linda saya. Oh, Maria Elise ya. Let's wait for Elise to come back. 5 more minutes. I think we are ready to start our second session. The second session this afternoon consists of another three speakers, one set of three speakers. We will have Dr. Amalinda Safirani with us here from Indonesia, and then we will have Dr. Eugene Tan from Singapore, and then Ms. Maria Elise Mendoza from the Philippines, as per usual, we'll have 30 minutes allocation of time per speakers, and then we'll continue with Q&A afterward, Mbak Linda, time is yours.
Thank you, everyone. It's a very difficult time to discuss things after lunch, so please bear with me. If I cannot make you stay awake, please fall asleep. Okay. Thank you so much, UIII, Pak Dekan, and all members of Faculty of Social Science for inviting and to arranging this very important event of having Southeast Asia update, which is a bit different from the other update, but I'm quite sure that this is going to be interesting comparison. So I guess that's really important. So I'm going to talk election in the context of civil society. Perhaps my talking or my presentation will in line with the Malaysian case presentation, and which is very good and nice because that's the idea of Southeast Asia, I guess, talking in a regional and comparative. We see similarities, we see differences, but essentially I think it's very nice to hear what other countries' experiences in the region concerning election, civil society, and human rights. So my topic is a bit complex, which I combine so many things at once. Civil society in the context of election, but I give a kind of adjective on civil society in Indonesia that it is fragmented and vulnerable, but at the same time also resilient and keep fighting. So showing you how complex the topic is and showing you also not just about a challenge, but I also think there are also opportunities, despite the small scale of the opportunities, but that's the way things operate usually. So three main arguments. Usually if I talk long, I forgot what I'm going to talk. So let me start with my my argument. Number one is I found, or maybe all of you realized that how plural civil society in Indonesia. But at the same time, it's a source of democracy, particularly in the context of election. Maybe this is too optimistic. You will say, that's not really the case, but let's discuss about this later. But this plurality is situated in the context of economic development orientation, as well as what we have been discussed before with Mas Jayadi, Bang Jayadi, about regression of democracy. And last but not least, this is a very main argument I want to make, how election is an opportunity for marginal groups. After fighting for so long, and seems that political parties and elections become an opportunity. My topic or my title, inspired by this article published last year after the Indonesian update last year, Vulnerable but Resilience, actually try to oppose or to critically see the argument that show Indonesian democracy is regressing, backsliding, illiberal and all that, but at the same time it's also irresilience. My take on this is the resilient part is relating to civil society. But I show you later that they are still they are resistant and they keep fighting. So before I continue to the data or the empirical case, let me clarify what I mean by civil society. My point of civil society relies on the way it is discussed in the literature, basically saying that the way it's liberal, meaning like civil society is enough to be outside the state, being a watchdog, telling you what to do, but don't take me in things that you do, right? So it's a liberal kind of a political watchdog type of civil society. The other scholars say, no, that's not really true. Civil society not just about a watchdog organization, but it needs to be part of politics, right? So we have, in the literature, we have these two opposing approach on civil society, but I want to show you that in Indonesia, the two are exist. There are groups that stay outside the politics, outside the state, but there are also groups that trying to make use of the politics in terms of state and parties to bring their agenda. So this is why perhaps the reason why civil society in Indonesia is not just vulnerable but also resistant, because we are talking about so many groups in civil society organization in Indonesia. But again, my presentation lies on these two different approach, which I argue basically Indonesia has two of them, which then make it really dynamic, complex, but at the same time provides so many opportunities. So this is what I quote from Hans Antloff in his study in 2005, perhaps no longer relevant because it's already more than almost 10 years ago. But we see civil society in Indonesia is basically very plural, but number one is centralized in big cities. So you have one in, and by I think what he means by centralized in big cities is basically Java-centric type of civil society organization, right? So that is centralized in big cities, is dominated by the middle class, professional, working on the topic, and less connection to the grassroots. So it's like doing different things at the same times, but they are all do coexist as well. So now grassroots connection, very plural in terms of sector. We now have women empowerment, we have climate change, we have anti-sexual violence, we have education, we have election, we have so many things, you name it. And it's very plural, and that's why sometimes it's difficult for civil society to find common ground, as if the common ground is somewhere out there. But essentially now, for instance, there are moments or events where they get together, particularly in 2014 when first time as a president, where all of us get together to not choose the military background president. That at that time was really a common ground. And before that, of course, 1998, where we tried to working on the democracy project against Suharto. And the last one is there's no clear ideology except being focused on the program. So that's really what I quote from Hans Antloff's studies on the features of Indonesian civil society organization. To make things go deeper, this is a data from 2017 that shows that registered number of civil society organization is around 300,000, right? And this is state registered, which means like you need to be qualified as either a foundation, or you are foreign CSO, or no legal identity, or CSO that registered in different ministry, but in total is around this number. I don't know yet how it is now, but my assumption that it's going the less number of, there are many civil society organizations that no longer operate. So, but just to show you this number, to put my argument about how plural, how big the size of civil society, I don't have time to check about the donor, how big they are, but I think you may have heard that over the past 10 years, once Indonesia become part of G20, this country is no longer regarded as a, what do you call that? It's already middle income country which doesn't need any support on development program. When scholars argue about regressing democracy, backsliding democracy, this data shows, well, maybe it's partly right, but maybe partly not too right, because if you take 2014 until 2023, this year, indeed, there are many, the one in the orange shows that a backlash, or how state become not really friendly to the civil society, to the freedom of expression, to the many activities that support freedom of expression and human rights. For instance, in 2015, labor movement was being stopped by the involvement in discussing their minimum wage. Usually the minimum wage is discussed every year by tripartite forum. It's no longer there because of this regulation. And then the famous one on Undang-Undang Information and Electronic Transactions, which basically limit freedom of expression or individual rights to express their opinion. Another in 2017 is when HTI was Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia, Indonesian organization on Islamic, aimed for the caliphate, was banned without court in 2017. And during the pandemic, very famous what they called repressive pluralism, basically the use of security apparatuses to managing the pandemic. And then the last but not least, bill on job creation law, facilitating investment or big money, what we call oligarchy, to operate, and National Election Commission rules women candidate that basically limit the potency or the participation of women candidate in terms of counting the votes. But at the same time, I think we need to be fair to also identify that there are also some progress. Number one, law on anti-sexual violence. It's a very important achievement, I think, why civil society organization, particularly on the one that work on the gender issues, managed to pass this bill in the parliament, combination between, what we call it, balcony fraction, non-formal or informal faction in the parliament that basically lobbying the member of the parliament to be consistent on the idea, on the topic to support this anti-sexual violence. The number two is presidential regulation number 17, which basically the government admit that there has been a case on human rights violation in the past. Many civil society organizations or activists be critical about that, but the fact that they admit, I think, is already a good progress. And Bang Jayadi mentioned before how the discourse on pushing the president to have 3 times period was being blocked by civil society organization too, at least from the perspective of public discourse. So looking from this journey, if we count quantitatively, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and versus 2, a bit lost, right? Civil society organization achievement, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing. That's what I want to say. So that's why perhaps vulnerable but resilient, vulnerable or fragmented, but also at the same time keep fighting.
The president must sign off, and like the key appointments, the parliament can override the president, provided took the view that if the president was not elected, his or her exercise of the custodial powers would not have any democratic legitimacy, right? Because the president would be appointed by parliament, and so when the election would give the president that mandate, that authority, to stand up against the elected government of the day. But what I need to mention is that the office, Singapore remains a parliamentary system of government, right? Where day-to-day policy making, the responsibility for the administration of the country, Prime Minister gave in a Channel News Asia documentary that was in a way trying to also explain to voters before the presidential election, what is this thing, that we call, our national reserves. There it goes. Let me see whether this is the next slide. Oops. Oh no, sorry, I'm losing track. My apologies. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that's what gives you the background to the elected presidency. So this was the election result. So you had Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, who was a PAP cabinet minister for 22 years. He's an ethnic Indian, and he contested against two Chinese candidates, Mr. Ng Kok Song and Mr. Tan Kin Lian. Mr. Tharman came home with a romping victory. He won 70% of the popular vote with his two candidates. The other two candidates, garnering no more than Mr. Ng getting 16% and Mr. Tan gathering 14%. But in a way, the election results were known quite early. So in Singapore, we have this thing called the election sample count. So for the presidential election, we had about 1,200 polling stations. And from each polling station, 100 ballots, right, are chosen at random. And so from these 100 ballots, so from 1,200 polling stations, you would have about 120,000 ballots. So the sample counts came in at about 11 p.m., about 3 hours after polling closed. And what the election sample counts, as they have done for the two previous general elections that the sample counts were used, were fairly accurate, right? So this was a sample count, and if you recall, it was it is almost the same as the actual results. And why Singapore introduced this was to give an early indication of what the likely outcome would be. And I think in the presidential election, it would be far more accurate, right? Because you are taking the country votes as a whole, there are no constituencies. So the sample counts would be a lot more accurate, right? Whereas for each constituency in a general election, a party may do well in one constituency but may not do well in another. So how does the national outcome becomes a bit less clear. And they introduced this partly because to try to reduce misinformation. Because I think that there is the concern about how results could be counting could be wrongly portrayed, and that could give rise to a lot of misunderstanding if the results didn't tally, with what with the sort of circulation of rumors and all. In my view, I don't think the sixth presidential election. I think it didn't disappoint, right? So here we have two academics, Tan, not me. Tan is the most popular family name in Singapore, but that's Kevin Tan and Cherian George. They before the election, they pointed out that if you have a successful government-backed candidate who wins, right? They argued that it will frustrate Singaporeans, right? Because Singaporeans want an alternative, right? They don't want to see a president that is closely aligned, with the ruling party, right? The ruling party has governed Singapore since 1959, and so the question of whether there will be appropriate checks and balances. On the other hand, right, Kevin and Cherian argued that if you have a non-establishment candidate who wins, then they said that this will heighten the government's distrust of the people, right? That the people may not have not chosen who they think would be, who the government thinks, right, would be the best person. Why I say that the election did not disappoint was because of the margin victory, right? So Mr. Tharman won 70% of the popular ballot, and that would mean that he would have garnered votes across the political spectrum, right? So in comparison, the ruling party won 61% of the popular vote in the last general election in 2020. What's significant was that because Singapore is 75% ethnic Chinese, for an election, for a presidential candidate to win 70%, that would mean that he or she, or in this case, Mr. Tharman, would have pulled a sizable number of of Chinese votes, right? Because there's no way you could get to 70% in an electorate that is 75% ethnic Chinese, right? So I think it does suggest how strong a candidate, voters viewed Mr. Tharman, right? So despite his PAP affiliation, right? So here he was the deputy prime minister. His last position was as senior minister. So he is as PAP as you can be, but yet I think given his track record, given his independence of mind, given his international stature, I think many Singaporean voters felt that despite his party affiliation, he would be someone who would be able to exercise the powers of the office independently. And I would say, if I could just share this in this room, I served as an unelected legislator between 2012 and 2014. So I had the opportunity of observing, Mr. Tharman in Parliament. And what is really odd is that at that time he was the finance minister, and during that time he also became the deputy prime minister. But what I noticed was many of the ruling party MPs did not really hang out with him during the breaks in Parliament sittings. I think it was almost seen like he was almost like that for the ruling party MPs, may not be so good for their political careers to be seen to be closely aligned with him. So he was really in a way quite unusual. In Parliament, he would treat every MP with respect. So even if you're an opposition MP and even if your question had a certain political angle to it, he essentially just answered the question that the MPs posed, rather than to insinuate, that the MP had a political agenda. Before the election, when he announced that he was going to contest, there were also concerns about whether, he was overqualified. The BBC did mention after the election that, Mr. Tharman could have been more than just an elected president, right? Because there was an informal poll that suggested that, he would be the most popular candidate to be the prime minister after Lee Hsien Loong. So what did the vote demonstrate? I think it demonstrated that the voters wanted a president who had the requisite experience and ability to be the custodian of Singapore's national reserves, as well as to safeguard the public service integrity, right? So it's really looking at his track record throughout his career, right? So he spent all his working life in the public sector, first as a bureaucrat, before going to politics. But he also has an international profile, right? So he's quite involved he was quite involved in the World Economic Forum. He has also served as the chair of the advisors, to the IMF. So very much, well regarded. And I think his whole public life has always been one about decency and respect. And I think that's something that people saw, could enable him to be that unifying figure, that the president's office ought to be. I also regard the vote, as a clear call for unity and multiracialism. Even as Singaporeans wanted a more robust system of checks and balances. Right, so you must bear in mind, right, here we have a government that's been in power since 1959, and in previous elections, the idea that the ruling People's Action Party is not like what it was before, is slowly also gaining traction. But here they chose a former PAP man. But I would say that it was his PAP career that also enabled voters to see what Mr. Tharman is all about. Right, that if he didn't have that career in the ruling party, his abilities would not have been brought to the public eye. And so after the election, there was this question of whether Singapore has now become post-racial, meaning that race doesn't matter, right? And so the question of whether that other big question, right? So we have had Malay president, we now have an Indian president who was elected, through a contest. So are we ready for a non-Chinese prime minister, right? Well, in the president's view, prior to during the campaign trail, he said we are, right, and I think that's a sentiment that many Singaporeans, agree with, but he was also mindful to acknowledge that race is always a factor, right? He referred to Obama himself, stating that race is always a factor, but he took the view that Singaporeans voters also looked at other factors as well, and so I think it's a question of when, rather than whether, Singapore will have a non-Chinese prime minister. If the ruling party wins in the next presidential election, the prime minister will likely be another ethnic Chinese, but I think it's quite clear, that in a way that glass ceiling, in my view, has been broken. But it goes back to what Lee Kuan Yew said many years ago, right? So this was when we first became independent, and he gave a very emotional press interview where he said that, this is what I call a constitutional moment, right? That we're going to be a multiracial nation, right? He said this is not a Malay nation, this is not a Chinese nation, this is not an Indian nation, right? Everyone will have his place equal, language, culture, and religion, right? And in a way, while it's taken us that long, hopefully that the day will come where we actually see this come to reality. So what are the signals, from the victory? So this is the ruling party's logo, right? It's a lightning bolt, because it speaks to action and all. But I don't think Mr. Tharman's victory suggests that the ground is sweet, for the ruling party. I think there are concerns with cost of living, issues such as immigration, have persisted. After lunch, I was having a chat with Gede, and Gede was saying, that when he spent some time in Singapore, doing a fellowship at the National University, he said, things are very quiet in Singapore, very placid. Well, they have not been so, right? We had MPs having to resign, including the speaker, over extramarital affairs. We now have a minister that is under investigation for corruption. So I don't think, that the ground is sweet. And in a general election, voters would very often apply quite different, criteria. And I know there was a lot of discussion about youth in some of the earlier presentation. That also hasn't changed in Singapore, right? Many of the young people, the students I teach, for example, they seem to have a stronger desire for more political diversity and greater political competition. If I can just backtrack a bit, right? This non-Chinese prime minister, I think it's also important to recognize that race becomes a key factor if nothing separates the different candidates, right? So if you have three candidates and they all have the same sort of qualities and strengths, it is possible that voters, and surveys have shown that, voters may prefer someone who is like them, meaning who is of the same race. But if you have a very strong candidate, right, then voters need not rely on this other proxy indicator of, is he someone like me? So the question of, whether we have gone post-racial, I don't think we have. Now, why do I say that, Mr. Tharman could be very pivotal? We are now in the midst of our third political leadership transition. And given that the current generation, the new generation of leaders probably will not command the same sort of political authority and respect, at least in the early years, when they take over, right, which will be in a year to 2 years' time. Having a president that that is respected by the people and respected by the cabinet, I think would be important, as Singapore undergoes what is perhaps its most challenging political transition. This is probably too small, but this, I've just sort of tabulated how the PAP has performed in the general elections since independence, right? So you can see that it's in terms of the vote share, it's weakening. If you think in terms of the total valid vote share, is generally on a downward decline, right? But what is the resilience of the PAP is that every time it fares badly, in the next election it will improve, on that relatively poor performance, right? So we have not had a situation where the PAP has done badly, or done progressively worse, in 2 consecutive elections. But it remains to be seen, right? Whether the next general election, would be the case. But here you see a fairly significant drop, right, of about 9%, right? But 2015 was, of course, a bit unusual, right? So that was the year that this was after Lee Kuan Yew's death, and there was that massive outpouring of support, for the ruling party. So this is just a photo taken at the swearing in, with the Prime Minister looking quite grim, but that's pretty much his demeanor, and flanked by the Chief Justice, another ethnic Indian, Sundaresh Menon, right? So I think in a way, if I were the ruling party, I would be quite worried about the presidential election result, right? Because it does suggest that voters do have very high expectations, and that they may very well expect, the ruling party, to have the same high standards that they set, for the presidential election. So let me just close by saying that, I do think the view, given that now we have a very weird situation where the elected president is arguably more popular than the elected government. It has never happened really in Singapore's history. How that will play out, is something that will be close to watch. But I take the view that Mr. Tharman would be one of the most, if not the most consequential leader in Singapore to become a lot more contested, as the landscape becomes a lot more competitive. Having someone who could pull the country together, becomes important, right? A president that is respected by both the elected government and the people, could be the important ballast, in Singapore's political transition. As I mentioned earlier, I think voters were signaling that the government can do better in terms of trying to win the trust and confidence of voters. And the last point really is, Mr. Tharman's slogan was, respect for all. And I would say that this is pretty much how he has conducted his public life. And I think this is how, the voters are going to see how the ruling party has governed Singapore over the last 4 years. And its campaign, does it campaign, with respect for political opponents? Does it campaign with trust and confidence and respect, for the Singapore voter, right? So we'll see. I think the government will release its. I think one of its. This is really one of its trump card that it has as it prepares for the next election, right? So it's reevaluating the social compact. The report will be out by the end of this year, and whether that makes for because of social inequalities, the perception that social mobility is going down in Singapore, the class divide, whether that particular report that seeks to reevaluate and come up with a fresh social compact, will be important, for the ruling party. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Again, I kindly request for you to hold your question first. We have the third speaker for the second session, Ms. Maria Elise Mendoza, speaking about the Philippines. Thank you.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. So I am Elise Mendoza from the UP Department of Political Science from the Philippines. So this work, Securitized and Nostalgic Digital Autocratization and Disinformation in the Philippines, is an ongoing work co-authored with Dr. Aris Arugay. So Dr. Aris Arugay is the chairperson of our department. So my presentation for this afternoon would be the key points of our ongoing study on digital autocratization and disinformation. So I teach Philippine politics at the same time. I'm very interested in the role of social media in elections and in politics in general. So, all right. So when Bongbong Marcos won the elections in 2022, I think the whole world was shocked because of the knowledge that Bongbong Marcos is the son of the dictator, Ferdinand Marcos Sr., who declared martial law in the Philippines in the 1970s. So the whole world was shocked, but Filipinos actually, it was somehow expected that he will win the elections in 2022. And that's why the discussion for this afternoon would be kind of tracing what led to Bongbong Marcos's victory in the 2022 elections, and it would show that the Philippines' tendency towards autocratization, together with the role of disinformation in Philippine politics, helped a lot, especially during the time of Duterte. Rodrigo Duterte was the former Philippine president, the previous Philippine president before Bongbong Marcos, and then it built up from Duterte, and Bongbong Marcos benefited from it, and probably another Duterte child, Sara Duterte, would most likely benefit from this phenomenon also. So a bit of background on autocratization. Digital technology, especially social media, is increasingly playing a role in autocratization in Southeast Asia, particularly when disinformation is spread through social media. It complements and reinforces autocratic policies and is usually carried out by state forces. So in other countries, it is the state itself that sponsors disinformation, especially when it comes to silencing their critics. But in the Philippine case, digital autocratization is outsourced. There are social media influencers and trolls for hire who are primarily responsible for the spread of disinformation. Digital autocratization in the Philippines began with Duterte, or during the time of Duterte, and was continued by Marcos Jr. Marcos Jr. is Bongbong Marcos. So just to provide a bit of background, how come we are the Philippines became very susceptible to this information to the point that it has been made possible that an election could be won through social media. It is because of our background as a digitally networked society. So the Philippines is known as the texting capital of the world back then, and eventually the social media capital of the world. Give us any social media platform, and for sure, there will be a lot of Filipinos who are subscribing to that platform. So 82% of online Filipinos are active on social media, and Filipinos also register the highest daily average of time spent online, an average of 9 hours a day. So imagine. Okay, so just a bit of data regarding the digital connectedness of Filipinos. So here we see that in January 2023, around 85 million Filipinos are internet users, and then 9 hours are spent using the internet, and then watching television, etc. So even though internet subscription packages are very expensive in the Philippines, it's already a part of our lives. We cannot live. Filipinos cannot live without the internet. So I'm saying that as a Filipina myself. All right. So and then in terms of the time spent on the internet, so 9 hours, and then in terms of the most used social media platforms, it's really Facebook. And then aside from that, Facebook Messenger, which is still part of Facebook, and TikTok. I think a bit of some of the presentations earlier already touched upon the role of TikTok now in politics, and in the Philippines, especially among the youth, TikTok is very, very popular. And during the campaign of Bongbong Marcos, there were a lot of TikTok influencers who would use the platform in order to campaign for Bongbong Marcos. But Facebook remains the most used social media platform in the Philippines. So the Philippines, apart from being active Facebook users, active social media users, active internet users, is also number 1 in terms of the percentage of internet users who follow influencers on social media. So influencers, not just celebrities, but even ordinary people who gain a bit of popularity online and are deemed legitimate sources of information. Before, influencers would just mainly focus on marketing, advertising commercial products, but eventually influencers were also hired for political campaigning. So we top a lot of things in terms of the internet. We're number 1 in a lot of things in terms of internet use. So the Philippines is number 1 in terms of those who follow influencers on social media. Unfortunately, this is a survey conducted by Pulse Asia, one of the leading polling firms in the Philippines. Social media influencers, as ironically as it may sound, are also seen as the number 1 sources of fake news. And apart from that, so imagine the problem. We follow a lot of influencers, but then these influencers are also seen as the number 1 sources of fake news. So how does that weigh in terms of the information that people get online? And I think it's just worth noting that it's very troubling that journalists are also seen as sources of fake news. And this has something to do with how Duterte attacked media during his term. Okay, so given that context, the Philippines is highly connected online, and then the internet has been weaponized for political purposes. How does that connect with Duterte? How does that connect with Bongbong Marcos, and eventually the victory of the Marcos-Duterte tandem, president and vice president, during the 2022 elections? So in order to understand all of that, we go back to the 2016 campaign period, or during the time when Duterte was still running for office, and then until eventually he became president. So in this paper, Dr. Arugay and I argue that securitized narratives together with nostalgic narratives lead to digital autocratization in the Philippines. So we will unpack that in this presentation. So the securitized narratives that would focus on the need for peace and order, began during the 2016 presidential campaign, and it continued throughout the duration of the Duterte administration. So a bit of background: Rodrigo Duterte was a longtime mayor of a city in Mindanao in the Philippines, South Philippines, and he was known for his iron fist leadership. So he was a local politician, and he rose to national prominence around 2015 until eventually he was pushed to run for president. So his securitized narrative is particularly captured by his 2016 promise, "Change is coming." This one, para sa tunay na pagbabago, that's Tagalog, and in English it says for true change or for real change. So Duterte ran on this promise: change is coming. Change in terms of what? Change in terms of eliminating drug addicts, change in terms of eliminating criminality and corruption in government. And looking at Duterte in terms of his demeanor and in terms of how he interacts with people, he acts like an ordinary person, like a person for the masses. He's not very concerned about how he looks, how he speaks. His language is similar to street language. So that's why a lot of people resonated with his promise and his campaign platforms. He would curse on national television and people would clap. at him for cursing on national television because it felt natural for them and it felt organic for them that someone would speak their language, the masses language, and not someone who's very technical, very intellectual. So that played an appeal, the populist appeal of Duterte. So he promised that change would be coming, and this promise was carried out in terms of his policies, his hallmark policies during his administration. So these securitized narratives, particularly captured by the change is coming promise, were used to justify Duterte's autocratic policies. So he ran on an anti-drug platform, and when he became president, I think it is known around the world that Duterte is infamously known for his war on drugs, the extrajudicial killings against drug personalities or drug addicts. So he then suddenly concerns about human rights were deemed irrelevant by some hardcore Duterte supporters. So this is during his annual State of the Nation address, like Philippine presidents deliver a State of Nation address every year. So this was in 2018. Your concern is human rights, mine is human lives. So this resonated so much with his supporters because it caused a moral dilemma among Filipinos. A lot of people were dying because of the extrajudicial killings, because of the war on drugs. But then on the other hand, it was being justified as we are actually cleansing society, because if we eliminate drug addicts, then we would prevent further damage to society, because these drug addicts, they're responsible for the rape of children, they're responsible for this and that. So this one. So the war on drugs was carried out throughout the Duterte administration, and he had the huge backing of the police and the military to accompany this policy. Aside from that, other autocratic policies include direct attacks to media, particularly ABS-CBN, the largest media network in the Philippines, was ordered shut down. And although Duterte tried to distance himself from the shutting down of ABS-CBN, because technically speaking, it was a legislative act that shut down ABS-CBN. His rhetoric against ABS-CBN in public speeches would show that he hates ABS-CBN because some of its coverage he deemed critical of his term. Aside from that, Maria Ressa, Nobel Peace laureate. So Maria Ressa, who's also the CEO of another media outlet called Rappler in the Philippines, was also arrested, and other attacks on media were present. So Duterte essentially, aside from propagating that narrative that the Philippines must be cleared of drug addicts, he also strongly echoed the message that we need to the Philippines must be ridden of communists and left-leaning groups. So if, for example, it became a common thing in the Philippines, if you speak against the government, you're automatically a communist sympathizer. So that became one of the running judgments against critics of the government. All right, so moving forward, securitized narratives were reinforced through online disinformation spread by organized troll farms. So Duterte's victory in 2016 is seen as a victory caused by social media, the first social media president in the Philippines. Although previous campaigns, presidential campaigns, and even midterm elections, local elections have already used social media, it was during the time of Duterte that social media was used extensively, especially when it comes to the spread of online disinformation, spread by organized troll farms. So here is another survey in 2022 which asks people what they think is the source of misinformation or fake news about the government and politics, and the internet or social media is one. And then there's this leading work by Filipino scholars entitled Architects of Network Disinformation, which actually discovered that the troll industry, those people hired to post disinformation online, is already, as I mentioned, an industry. It's so organized wherein they are hired by PR firms, and it's not just a hobby anymore, but rather it's an entire business model. It has its own business model already. And the Duterte camp, during his campaign and even during the entirety of his administration, was able to utilize hiring these so-called trolls. Okay, so the Philippines, Facebook Global Executive Katie Harbath in 2018 labeled the Philippines as the patient zero in the epidemic of fake news, or the infodemic of fake news. And Check.ph is a coalition of civil society groups, media groups, academe that actually fact checks claims, identified that most fake news or disinformation posts spread on Facebook, and Facebook is the most used social media platform in the Philippines. So connecting the dots, we really have a big problem in terms of that. And apart from that, the format of fake news or disinformation often comes in terms of video format or photo format. So it's easily shared across platforms. On TikTok, we can just scroll and without necessarily verifying or the information shown there. Okay, so that's for the Duterte part. He was heavy on securitized narratives, the need for peace and order, the need to eliminate the Philippines of drug addicts. And even though he executed these policies that obviously go against human rights, he was highly popular. In all presidential satisfaction surveys, Duterte maintained a very high satisfaction rating. It's like his popularity never dwindled, and even during the pandemic. So it was puzzling for others, but it just goes to show that his narrative work in his favor. So how about Bongbong Marcos? Where does he come in? And in this digital autocratization phenomenon. So the 2022 campaign of Bongbong Marcos capitalized on authoritarian nostalgia, particularly nostalgia about his father's regime. So there has been a lot of efforts to whitewash the legacy of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. and to undertake what people call historical revisionism. And nostalgic narratives focus on the martial law age and Marcos Sr.'s legacy, and these were spread on social media. So it's a project that Bongbong Marcos undertook. So his victory in the 2022 elections, as I mentioned, it was kind of expected because they were already doing the steps towards propping himself up even way before that. So here, this is a very powerful image that for many Filipinos, it would resonate a lot with them. Marcos Sr., the dictator who ruled from 1965 up until his ouster in 1986, is known for his V sign when making speeches. Like that, so V sign. And then Bongbong Marcos ran for the vice presidency in 2016. Duterte ran for president in 2016, but they're not running mates. They had different running mates. So in the Philippines, we elect the president and the vice president separately. So the president can have a different running mate. So Bongbong Marcos was not his running mate. He tried to copy his father, at least in terms of gestures, in terms of trying to speak, and that V sign. And then in the 2022 presidential campaign, it was a continuation. So imagery-wise, that's one. So for those who live through martial law, common sentiments on social media would include, oh, it's just like his father. So that's an indication that it's kind of working. And they look alike. So he used that to his advantage. But Dr. Arugay and I would argue that one act, state-sponsored at the same act that actually legitimized the authoritarian nostalgic narrative of Bongbong Marcos would be when Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was allowed to be buried in the Hero Cemetery in November 2016. For the longest time, Marcos Sr. was buried in his home province, Ilocos Norte, in northern Philippines. And there have been some talks that he should be transferred to the Hero Cemetery because he was a former president. Former presidents are buried there in the Hero Cemetery unless their families would request that they be buried elsewhere. But presidents, basically, they have a privilege to be buried there. So he's happily resting in Ilocos Norte, but his family wanted to transfer him to the Hero Cemetery. So it was during the time of Duterte was just starting his term. It was November 2016. Presidents take their oath on June. So Duterte started his term on June 2016. Just a few months later, people would brand it like a thief in the night because the Supreme Court decision that allowed the father of Bongbong Marcos to be buried in the Hero Cemetery was made very quickly, as if they were running after a deadline. It happened so quickly, and there was little media coverage at first when they were transferring the remains from Ilocos Norte to Manila up until it was buried. So it caused a lot of outrage, but at the same time, it brought back to the national attention the idea or the question of, was martial law good? Was martial law bad? Is Marcos Sr. a hero or not? So in social media, popular hashtags would include hashtag Marcos not a hero. And then supporters would say hashtag Marcos is a hero. So that this grand act of burying him in the hero cemetery was, in a way, legitimized the narrative. And Duterte had something to do with this in the sense that he indirectly allowed it, and he did not oppose it also. Okay, so. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Marcos Jr., he was already building himself up prior to the 2022 elections, and he was building on authoritarian nostalgia. So he has a vlog on YouTube. He established his vlog maybe a year or two after losing in the 2016 vice presidential race. And it was worth noting that his loss in 2016 was with a very thin margin. So that's why he contested it also. He accused the opponent of cheating, etc. But then it was upheld that he really did lose that election. So anyway, after losing the 2016 vice presidential elections, Bongbong Marcos began to establish his social media presence more. So he had a YouTube channel, he had a Facebook channel, and he would upload videos there. And some videos would include reminiscing his father, answers about my dad. It was uploaded in 2019. Marcos Day Special, reacting to my dad's iconic photos. So for casual social media users, they would think this is entertaining, but it's actually an act of whitewashing, Marcos Sr. and actually portraying him as just an ordinary human being, a father, a good father to a son like Bongbong. So touching on people's emotions in that manner also played a huge role for them. Okay, so during the 2022 campaign periods, there were also movements in people's positive or negative evaluations of martial law and the EDSA People Power Revolution. So if you would see here, there are dips and there are increases in terms of people's positive or negative evaluations of martial law. So February 2022, we commemorate the ouster of the dictatorship in the Philippines every February 2022. So here we see that in February, it's actually weird that in February 2022, there was an increase. There was an increase in terms of people's positive evaluations of martial law. So Dr. Arugay and I would interpret this as a way that the narratives being spread online in terms of making people get confused about what really happened during martial law was actually working. That people were starting to double guess or double take on what they believe martial law was all about. So, moving forward, nostalgic narratives latched on to Duterte securitized narratives to justify the need for a continuation of strongman rule. So, the martial law period in the Philippines is known for its massive human rights violations, and basically, yeah, it's a dictatorship. So, those who lived, the elderly generation who lived during martial law, would often speak about the martial law period as a period of discipline, because Filipinos are undisciplined and we need a strong leader to be able to make people obey even the simplest rules in the streets. So Duterte was someone who kind of represented that idea that discipline is needed, and then it was brought back to national attention that claims regarding the good and bad sides of the Marcos dictatorship spread on social media and was brought back to national attention. So putting those together, people who changed their perspectives or who viewed martial law as a good period in Philippine history would also be the same kind of people who thinks that the Filipinos need a disciplinarian in order to rule us effectively. So Duterte was one. So the one who should succeed Duterte should also be someone who would impose that kind of discipline. Okay, so these are examples of pro-Marcos nostalgic claims spread on social media. They're in Filipino, but basically speaking, just as we thought, it has already been established in history that these are the facts regarding the dictatorship. Suddenly, on social media, they are being questioned. Like, for example, there's this, here, the third one. Ferdinand Marcos Sr. pinahiram ng 3,500 toneladang ginto ang 170 na mga bansa. In English, it means, did Ferdinand Marcos lend 3,500 tons of gold to 170 countries? It garnered so much views and so much interaction. So there were actually some believers of or supporters of the Marcoses who think that they own so much gold, and this was practically absent before. But then these are part of the claims that are being that were propagated during the election period. So. Social media was so much saturated during the 2022 campaign of these claims. And it is also worth noting that, as I have also observed in one of my own studies, the campaign of Bongbong Marcos on social media focused less on his personality as a candidate and more on authoritarian nostalgia. So if people were going to campaign for Bongbong Marcos, they're not going to campaign for him, vote for Bongbong because he is smart, vote for Bongbong because he has this and that platform, but rather vote for Bongbong because he is the son of his father. Facebook. Yeah, Facebook groups that posted such claims, and it was checked by the Alliance of Fact Checkers, Check PH. So, yeah, the campaign of Bongbong Marcos really capitalized on authoritarian nostalgia and making people wonder that the one who must succeed Duterte must also be a strong man or disciplinarian like him. So here, this also from online sentiments, Check PH was also able to see that sentiments regarding Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was mostly or 100% positive from the sample narratives that they checked. Rodrigo Duterte 71% positive, whereas for the two Aquinos, Cory Aquino and her son Benigno Aquino III, the perceptions were highly negative. So Cory Aquino, she's the widow of opposition politician Ninoy Aquino, Cory Aquino was the president who succeeded Marcos after his ouster in 1986. So Cory Aquino is branded as the one who brought back democracy to the Philippines, etc. And when she died in 2009, 2010 was a presidential election year. Noynoy Aquino was a senator back then, but he was not a strong candidate for the presidency. But since his mother died, and then there was an outpouring of support for Cory Aquino, Noynoy Aquino was made to run for president. And the idea of authoritarian nostalgia can be combined with so-called democratic disillusionment, because when people try to explain how did Duterte become so popular, democratic disillusionment among Filipinos is one thing or one piece of explanation that comes into mind. Democratic disillusionment meaning all these previous presidents, they promised all sorts of reforms, but what happened? Nothing changed. So here comes Duterte, a strong person who curses on national television, who acts just like any one of us, who actually looks like someone who is able to do what he is promising to do. He is promising that he would do, and he did it. He said he would try to clear the Philippines of drug addicts, so it happened. So that's why people's frustration over reforms, over our democratic institutions, coupled with authoritarian nostalgia, played a role in the popularity of Duterte and eventually Bongbong Marcos. Okay, and then there's this survey, Voces Pilipinas, Voice of the Philippines Vine survey, which looks at the preferred candidate traits of Filipino voters. Which of the following three character traits are most important for you in voting for a candidate? Providing strong leadership is number one. So, among different candidates, BBM or Bongbong Marcos top all candidates' qualities except for being religious. But for all these things, people have perceived Bongbong Marcos as someone who would be able to provide strong leadership. Okay, so putting all those together, the Duterte securitized narratives and set the tone for the Philippines in terms of needing a strong leader. And then the 2022 campaign of Bongbong Marcos capitalized on authoritarian nostalgia. Both of these things, securitized narratives and nostalgic narratives, were spread on social media. So the main argument that we put out would be the 2022 Philippine elections demonstrated digital autocratization that began with Duterte and was continued by Marcos Jr. Okay, so during the 2022 campaign, there was an increase in September 2021 and March 2022. There was an increase in terms of people or people who would use the internet to look at political information. So read, watch, listen to the news regarding elections, and look at news regarding the government. So increasingly, from September 2021 to March 2022, more Filipinos turned to the internet instead of other media sources in order to get their information about politics. And then there's this survey, among your sources of information, which do you think highly influenced your choice of candidates for this election? So for those who voted for Bongbong Marcos, 38% of them would say that they got their information from social media in terms of convincing them to vote for Bongbong Marcos. So really, social media played a huge role in terms of the campaign of Bongbong Marcos. Okay, so I think this is... Am I in time? On time? So I think this is the last slide. Pervasive disinformation complemented the autocratic policies of Rodrigo Duterte, benefited the Marcos Jr. campaign, and continues to negatively affect the fragile state of Philippine democracy. Up until now, influencers on TikTok, on Facebook, are being used to whitewash some government policies. Like, for example, in the Philippines, we're experiencing high inflation. Like, the prices of goods are really rising right now, and it has been discovered recently that there's this group of influencers who seemingly put out similar narratives, different videos, but similar script in terms of defending the inflation rate, that this and that. And there were also other influencers who are being used to highlight the so-called achievements of the current Marcos Jr. administration. Who else benefited or may benefit from digital autocratization? Sara Duterte. Sara Duterte is the daughter of Rodrigo Duterte. So if Rodrigo Duterte was a long-time mayor of Davao City, it was Sara Duterte, his eldest daughter, who has succeeded him in different positions. So Sara Duterte also occupied local positions in Davao City. So before rising to the vice presidency, she was mayor of Davao City. It was actually interesting that during the 2022, the run-up to the 2022 elections in the Philippines, Sara Duterte was the top candidate for president, but she did not run for president, but instead she slid down as the running mate of Bongbong Marcos. So she formed this so-called uni team with Bongbong Marcos. So it was spread all over the Philippines. Their campaign posters, their campaign slogans featured this term, unity, because Bongbong Marcos ran on a campaign of unity, that we need to unite society, forget all the polarization in the past, and his merger with the Sara Duterte was seen as the merger of the North and the South, because he's from the north of the Philippines, Sara Duterte was from the south of the Philippines. That's why their combination was so strong that it's the first time since our constitution was promulgated in 1987 that we had a majority president. So Bongbong Marcos won more than 50% of the votes for president, despite us having more than 5 presidential candidates during the 2022 elections. And it's also interesting that Bongbong Marcos got around 31 million of the votes, while Sara Duterte got 32 million votes. And Sara Duterte is also known as a tough figure. Like, even she's a woman, but she's known as being a tough mayor. Like, if there's an instance, she would also there's this viral video in 2007, I think, wherein she punched a sheriff, so caught on cam because of some disagreements over something local. So she's seen as a tough figure, someone who resembles her father. So Sara Duterte's current rhetoric as vice president also reflects a continuation of her father's securitized narratives. So as vice president, she's also the Secretary of Education. I mean, it's another conversation that we can have regarding the role of the Vice President in Philippine politics. But she's now currently the Secretary of Education, and she would often talk about the need for peace and order and imbibing in the students the sense of national security. So she's actually continuing somehow the securitized narratives of Rodrigo Duterte. And also, Bongbong Marcos himself, he's not big on the narratives in terms of eliminating the Philippines of drug addicts and communists, but Sara Duterte, she's the one who's continuing those from Rodrigo Duterte. Okay, so that ends my presentation, that the digital autocratization manifested in the 2022 Philippine elections, and it's brought about by securitized narratives, mostly coming from Duterte, and nostalgic narratives coming from the camp of Bongbong Marcos. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Alice. Now we have the Q&A session for the next questions from the audience. And yes, Dinita, and then my student there, Nizar. Let's just take the first four, yeah, Dinita?
Thank you. My name is Dinita from Luminate. Thank you all for the presentations. May I also ask the questions to the previous speakers? If anyone of you interested in answering this, my question is that we talk about the elections and democracies, and Buhana touched upon a little bit about. And I ask this is because I'm intrigued with, like, content is very important to reach younger generations and also older generations. And Punchada from Thailand mentioned that, you know, this party doesn't have any content, so they don't really known by these people. But there's another side of it. Disinformation and propaganda, malicious content, and also influencer for hire. One of the other work that we are supporting is about mis and disinformation in the region and how platforms play a role. One of our partners found that these influencers, or like these people who spreads mis and disinformation, is agnostic to political views, and they're not, like, for example, in Myanmar, about the political junta, they're not even speak Burmese, they're not even based in Myanmar. This just like groups of boys in hoodies sitting in a small city in Cambodia, for example. They're just using the gaps or the way that platforms operates to hire to gain profit out of this malicious content because it gets more clicks. So I wanted to understand, how do you see this development of technology plays a role in elections and democracy in the region? And perhaps specifically for Maria, is there any governance directed to the social media platforms? I know you're laughing, but yeah, is there any governance looking at what happened in the elections? And you know, there's a lot of propaganda happening as well. And should we, or how do we regulate platforms, or should we even regulate platforms? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dinita.
Thank you, good day, and thanks for all the speakers for the insightful presentation. I have a couple of questions to Maria. Is it right from? Okay. So, I'm sorry if I. So, as many people talk about the Philippinization of Indonesia, so I think it's very great to have you here. So we can learn something. Maybe if Indonesians really Philippinize themselves, what would happen in the future then? So the first question, you presented how Duterte, how social media can be very influential for the victory of the Duterte. So that's exactly my question. How is it possible that Duterte can use, if it is social media, is it, I imagine that actually in the victory relies, as Mas Jayadi mentioned, social basis and material basis. Does it mean that the, let's say, in the social and material basis of the Philippines somehow intersect much with the social media, that the use of social media can influence much of the voters? Or what happened actually? Why the social media can be really influential in the Philippines? Related to this question, I believe that Indonesians also learn very much from the Philippines in terms of social activism, because the Philippines became democracy a year later than Indonesia. So my question is, what was the response of the social activists, democratic activists in the Philippines in dealing with the social media campaign? That how is it possible that social media campaign from the Duterte influenced the voters very much? If you learn from Pak Jadi's presentation today, it seems that Indonesian, they could say something different from, let's say, even though the ruling governments and their allies, they have so many buzzers, they have so many influencers, but it seems their voices are not the only voice in the social medias that other people might counter them. So what happened in the Philippines, actually? Thank you.
Thank you, Masiro. And then our friend is that here. I forgot your name. Rizky. Yes.
Test. Thank you very much. My question is for Ms. Maria too. That was a really interesting discussion. So, my name is Nizar. I'm from political science here. I'm a student. So, my question related to what Pak Siros has asked before too. How the influence of this kind of social media in this current situation, but if you know the condition of the condition of social media is really it has to be like have two sides, right? I mean it can be beneficial for the candidates. It's also become the something negative for the candidates, of course. I mean, in this sense, the candidate can be unbeneficial from the social media, because there are many parties who use social media to share the hatred. Because, for example, like what happened in Marcos Jr., his father is a dictator. He was a dictator at that time. And it became the flaw or the weakness of the Bongbong Marcos, of course. And maybe I kind of miss your explanation about this. Is it only about the white clan that you mentioned that made the Bongbong Marcos being elected in the president elections, or is there any other condition? Because what I read from the articles, the news, that one of the candidate, I forgot, maybe Maria, she was using the weakness of Marcos to attack the past of his father, if I'm not mistaken. So how it's influenced the election system in Philippines? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the speakers for your insightful presentations as well. My name is Rizky Adiaksa. I'm student, master's student here from political science. My question is especially directed to Bu Amalinda Safirani. One of your case that you made was that, quote, election is an opportunity for marginal groups, close quote. Now, my question would be, is election, maybe my first question, is election an area where marginal groups can gain from, right? Is it a place where marginal groups can have some relative gains, let's say? Because the reason why I ask this question is that one might argue that election is actually an opportunity for everyone, right? Not just marginal groups. And probably the probability to gain something from elections is higher for those incumbents, higher for those elites, right? And then how can marginal groups can have a fruitful results from election? Secondly, I guess a more interesting question would be, is it important for alternative groups, maybe for this case is worker party, we can use this as a case study. Is it important for worker party to publicly support one of the presidential candidates? But I'm not going to ask you who for now. But probably that's my second question. What they should identify and what kind of, again, political trade-offs that the worker parties can garner from this coalition. So that's two of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll give the time to the speakers to answer the questions that we have gathered. Maybe Maria first. A lot of questions are addressed to Maria, yeah?
Some of the answers. Okay, so I hope I can cover everything. So first, regarding the question, as much as I can remember from my notes, whether the government is regulating or doing something against these disinformation being spread on social media, the answer is none. So that's the direct answer. There are no actual government policies being designed to counter disinformation, probably because the current administration is also benefiting from it. And then there are talks, like lip service talks, that we should increase media literacy, we should teach people how to check the information. But then there are also deeper societal factors that make people become disinformation workers. So as mentioned, some of these influencers or trolls for hire are agnostic to political views. They're not necessarily a supporter of that, but because they were hired to do it, they look at it as a job. They look at it as something that they can get money from. So those material conditions must also be addressed, because the Philippines, outside of politics, outside of social media, is also known as one of the biggest sources of digital workers around the world, BPOs. So those material conditions that make people resort to being digital workers must also be addressed, and not just simply teaching media literacy in schools. But of course, that's important. But then, as long as there are people who would find, who would see that it's they can get profit, they can get income, they can actually get money from posting on social media, we cannot really eliminate this. And then next would be the two related questions on how come social media became influential in the Philippines. So in terms of internet habits, it's already been established that Filipinos use the internet so much. So Facebook is already popular even before the context of the elections. But one thing I think I actually miss it in the presentation was that there were also some external factors involved, wherein the algorithms of Filipinos were actually targeted to with the use of macro or nano influencers, wherein these influencers, they are not big personalities, but they're actually just people posting on groups and then making it appear as if the conversations in favor of Duterte are organic. So Duterte became the most talked about candidate on social media, and I think this helped a lot in his campaign. So people did not notice at first that they were already being manipulated, like public opinion was already being manipulated, because the users who posted in these groups are just ordinary people. Because for example, if someone very popular would speak in favor of Duterte, people would think, that celebrity was hired to endorse the candidate. But since ordinary people were doing the post, it seemed very organic, it seemed very authentic, and Duterte was the first one to do it. And that's why we didn't have a clue that it was possible to actually target your algorithms on social media. And for those who are not too familiar, if you search something on social media on Facebook later on, or if you search something like, for example, on Google, later on it would appear on your Facebook feed. So algorithms were used very strategically in the case of Duterte. And regarding the question about Bongbong Marcos, that for some, the legacy of his father was seen as his weakness, but actually the candidate that you were talking about is former Vice President Leni Robredo. So the former Vice President, she was the main opposition candidate during the time of Duterte and also during the presidential campaign in the 2022 elections. However, I was not able to mention it in the presentation. Leni Robredo was heavily demonized on social media by pro-Duterte trolls. Like she was called names. She was attacked for being a woman. So there were already a lot of fake news circulating against Leni Robredo during the time of Duterte, because she's also a critic of the Duterte administration, because she advocated for transparency, accountability in government, non-dynastic politics, shift away from traditional politics. So when it came beginning, during the time that she was going to run for president, she had a very hard time trying to undo the narratives that were hurled against her when she was still vice president. So even though she tried to counter or to talk about the negative effects of the legacy of Marcos Sr. during the campaign period, the social media force or the social media army of Marcos Jr. were stronger in terms of countering her and further demonizing her and likening her to the other previous presidents. In social media, Leni Robredo was being likened to Cory Aquino, and Cory Aquino already had a very negative image for pro-Marcos supporters because she promised that she would actually bring back democracy in the Philippines, and then people got disappointed regarding that. So yeah, the attacks hurled against that former vice president worked to her disadvantage, especially when it came to running in the election. So even though there were attempts, even by supporters to Robredo supporters to make people realize that Marcos Jr. is the son of the dictator, they already had an undue advantage in terms of manipulating the narrative. So that's why it didn't really work. Because, as I mentioned, it's been a years-long project. Whereas, it's been a years-long project for them. So, yeah. I hope I was able to answer the different questions.
Before I go to Mbak Linda, just a minute. I think you have a question to the previous speakers. What was the question again, Dinita?
It's about the role of, how do they see the role of social media and technology to elections and the democracies? Perhaps Pafarish wants to.
Well, very simply, nothing has changed, right? We are talking about social media and everyone's startled and amazed by it, but I think what we are amazed by is the fact that social media has the accelerating effect and it's a multiplier. But hate speech begins with printing. Once we have books, we already have hate speech, right? If you go back to the 15th century, works like The Hammer of Witchcraft, which is a text used to kill people, accused of witchcraft, that's hate speech. And even then, from the beginning of printing, we have the problem of how to regulate content. And so none of these issues, like I said earlier, none of this should strike us as surprising. I think the only difference is the multiplier effect. Now, states, I think, have the problem of containing the speed with which these things spread. Here's the problem, because we live in a post-colonial world where we are embedded in global capital. All states collaborate with high tech. All states welcome. I mean, look at how Southeast Asia, all our governments are opening the doors to all these high-tech companies coming in because we want development. But this is the price, And I think people still cannot see how something like social media can be weaponized in the same way that books can be weaponized. And until we have a discussion about that, the weaponization of social media, I don't think we'll get anywhere. Because, obviously influencing works. If influencing doesn't work, you won't have advertising, right? And so these things are all very mundane, actually. And I don't see a change in the paradigm. I think I see a change in speed and volume, that's all. But later on, I have a question as well.
Just super short.
Okay, sure.
Sure. Super short. It was also asked what are the reactions of the democratic activists on the use of social media. I think now we can all, it has already been accepted that social media will continue to play a role in political processes. So before there was a state of denial, social media is just for people's pastime. So now even activists themselves are using social media to counter or to express their opposition or their dissent. So it's like fighting fire with fire. Even media in the Philippines are now using TikTok journalists are using TikTok to deliver news, because now there's the realization, the acceptance that social media is already here, we should use it. So it's kind of like now becoming a battle of narratives and who would get ahead than the others. So that's my short answer to the previous question. Thank you.
Thank you. Valinda, please.
Okay, thank you for the questions. I I think I want to respond that questions by situating the way civil society organizations, advocacy strategies over the past almost 30 years, I guess. I think they've tried everything, including campaign, advocacy, policy advocacy, but this time by taking advantage of the elections, I think they are basically trying to claim the elections. When Pak Faris this morning say election is a pesta, is a party, for some people it's not a party, it's a between life and death, basically. So I guess there are two layers there, and what the civil society organization, the grassroots movement try to do is basically, number one, reclaiming the election by putting it or positioning it as things that really matters for them, relating to basic rights, which is workers' right, and for the two cases that I show is workers' right and affordable housing rights. So my point is that election is a continuation from what have they done so far in claiming those rights. So it's not just suddenly become part of the use election. And I also realized that other activists do the same too since 2014 and 2019 and perhaps earlier 2009, right? But this is I can argue this is a different type of claiming the elections, because this is, number one, this is the grassroots people, the ordinary people who have nothing except themselves and the community and the grassroots. Number two is really like, there's no guarantee that when they are elected, they will get, as long as there is a control from the grassroots, they will doing well, because the connection, the problem with political parties and our representative democratic representation, there is no control from the constituent, from the voters after the election, right? So we have this cycle for 5 years in Indonesia at least, 4 years in the Singapore and others different years. All the energy focusing on the D-Day of the elections. But after that, the next 5 years, for the next cycle, it's another battle basically, but the energy been focusing on the election day. So we have the democracy as by the people, for the people. Dari rakyat, from the people, from, by, for, right? So the context of by and for, nobody pay attention. It's only focusing on by the people. Is that right? From the people on the election. So my response to your question is that, of course, it's not. It doesn't mean that everyone else or other groups do not take advantage of it. We know that vote buying are still there. In one way or another, constituent or the voters get something from the D-Day of the election through the vote buyings, right? A very minimal and very small short-term pragmatic orientation of gaining benefit, using your terms, also the elites. But what I want to show in the discussion of civil society organization, grassroots organization, in the context of election, there has been a new way of framing it, right? So what is the threat? What is the threat of? Of course, there's always a trade-off in the option that you choose. Concerning the second questions on the Workers' Party, I think their main target is on the job creation law, right? So it's been a lot of discussion and it's been a lot of debate, because none of the candidates so far can really reflect their interests. But to have no option also a problem, right? So there is this dilemma. We still need to see, because officially there is no explicit support, official support, formal support to one of the candidates. There are some of the group in the elites try to maneuver, but officially or formally there's not, so far as I know, not yet there. But I think in politics always a trade-off. So it's really difficult to have 100% benefit and 0% of threat. So it's always been a trade-off. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Malinda. Any of the previous speakers want to respond to Dinita's question regarding the role of social media? Punchada?
Well, just a quick, social media, it's actually in political scientists, when you go back to Panimbianco, there's a theory back about 80s that, political party have to rely on itself, and then social media and media will come to influence political party, which is happened in 2023. But the thing is, I don't think that only the social media is matter at this time. I don't know in other cases, but in Thailand. But other, technologies, Chat GPT become really influent in political parties in Thailand. Well, for me, myself, I was actually a consultant with one of the political party, and I control all the policies that we run for the campaigns in past elections. Believe it or not, I don't know how to think about interesting motto. I used Chat GPT. I did it, yeah. And it's all over the country. And it worked very well. And other political party as well, they do the same thing. And the problem is, political party trying to use social media in the campaigns and everything, but the state did not really be able to follow to make the law to control all this social media. Like in Thailand, when they announced that you cannot use any media to introduce yourself a day before the election. And then, it's really ridiculous that all politicians post one page in their Facebook and Twitter that now we are stopping using social media. But how about the rest? In the footprint and other things, it's out there. But the law cannot do anything. So then this is a problem that the advance of technology, but the state in Thailand, I'm not quite sure with other countries, but in ASEAN itself, our law is really behind what's the development of the social media and how to control politicians and political party to use the social media in order to do the campaigns and everything.
Thank you. And then Ko?
I'd just like to add on that I think the influence of social media is real, but not everything, because it depends on the context of the particular countries. For example, in the context of Malaysia, there's also always talking about how influential the social media can impact on the elections. But from the past, in 2013, if all of you will remember, the Cambridge Analytica has actually played a very influential in terms of our previous prime minister, who is now in the prison, Najib Razak. But he has not managed to actually win as much as he wished because of other conditions and other factors that have impacted the power of that technology itself. So that's why my argument will be really depending on the context and of course from different dimensions that you can look at, because Philippines case is interesting because when Malaysia changed the government in 2018, the human rights group always remind ourselves we cannot repeat what happened in Philippines. And one of the reasons that we in our opinion is the failure of democracy in the Philippines itself, because that political culture that has been built after the people power revolutions has not changed entirely. That civic political culture within the system still remains. The people who has actually lived on throughout the dictatorship still maintain inside the system itself. Hence, that democratization process was very short-lived, and that continue because of that particular reason. So in the Malaysia case, that is why we always remind ourselves that after 2 elections, we might return back, we never know, but the resources unfortunately are not able to actually help out in that. So I think there are very many other factors that we can look at, how influential the social media is, and that regulation itself, well, I don't believe in a platform that only punish people if you do something, because that is also precisely how the government is using. For instance, in the context of Malaysia, we are warned that we should not use 3R, race, religion, and royal institutions in the speeches and so forth. But for me, it is not a good sign. You cannot avoid talking about the sensitive issues, but if the government say you should avoid, just simply because they justified it by saying that we want to avoid hate speech, but I think it is totally politicized by them for their political interest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I want to add the discussion on the social media and to add, I guess you're right that it really depends on the context and what I want to say that Indonesian case, I've been following a student movement in 2019 using social media, but the social media became a backlash. And because of that, they go offline. Because of that, there is hoax and disinformation about this street protests, and it's everywhere, and they cannot control it. They decided to turn it off and go offline to clarify everything. I think the idea is like there are situations where it can work, but there are also situations when it cannot work. For instance, if for the critical group of for the oppositions, right, to use social media as a platform, they have another enemy, which is more resources, more troops, and everything, and try to say otherwise through the disinformation and hoax. So it's really interesting to see that it's not always working, and there are again a requirement how it can work or how it cannot work.
Okay, thank you, Melinda.
Just very short, I also remembered what Farish talked about earlier regarding the difference in political memory of 20-year-olds then and when we were that age. Actually, one of the prominent counter arguments against claims that martial law is bad, like for example, if youth groups would go to social media and say never again to martial law. That's the rallying call in the Philippines. Never again to Marcos, never again to martial law. Pro-Marcos supporters would tell them, why? Were you already alive during that time? We were alive during that time. And there was a lot of discipline. There was a lot of... Sorry, but that's true. And it actually kind of shocks the person who's the person being told that way, that when you are told why were you already alive during that time, so that's that the Marcos camp also used that difference in political memory to say that these people, they were already alive during the time of Marcos. They can attest to the level of discipline that was already present during this time. And these people also underwent the people power revolutions. They can attest to the frustrations that democracy was not really changed, or the system was not really changed when the Aquinos came to power. So you who did not live during the time, you have no say, or you have no what they call this credibility to talk about never again to martial law. So I just remembered it from Farish earlier, and then the discussions here regarding context, because martial law happened 1972. So the ones who have experienced it are already parents or grandparents now. So they have a lot of stories to talk about that.
That's the same when Mahathir returned and become a prime minister. Exactly the same conversation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have also a couple of questions from Mas Faris, Mas Rifki, and then I would like to exercise my right to be selfish.
It's not really a question, but just to maybe we can continue the discussion afterwards. We've been talking about nostalgia, but you know, nostalgia goes in all directions, right? And what you described in the Philippines, I mean, we see the same in America, make America great again. So something that's past tense and projected into the future tense. And then you have, you know, if you look at the nostalgia in Britain leading up to Brexit, the idea that Britain was once sovereign, but it has now been compromised, and so we have to regain it. And nostalgia is selective in the things that it wants to select. My question, and really this is, you know, I suppose, you know, a question that we need to ask the progressive groups. You can also have a nostalgia of democracy. You can also have a nostalgia of, you know, earlier periods of tolerance, accommodation, you know, inclusiveness and what have you. And yet I've not seen that really, you know, being articulated in a very forceful way. But I do agree with what has been said. We are not going to escape social media. It's going to be here. You know, waiting for the regulation of social media is like expecting the American Republican Party to have gun controls. It's not going to happen. It will never happen. Yeah. So we're going to live with this. But like I said, we've had this since the beginning of printing, the moment books, I mean, how was the French Revolution fought? With pamphlets. Yeah, that's your Facebook at the time, right? Yeah, and likewise, you couldn't control pamphlets. So the question is, what kind of nostalgia do we want? And I think this is where, early on, we talked about crisis. You can see crisis immediately as a negative thing. And this is how a lot of progressives tend to see crisis. We react to crisis. But crisis is productive, because in a sense, you need crisis for there to be structural change. So in a sense, sometimes you need the machine to break before you can repair it. So I think this is actually a very good time in Southeast Asia to reactivate other kinds of nostalgia. You know, nostalgia about interconnectedness, nostalgia about migration, movement, and settlement, all these things that make Southeast Asia such an interesting thing. And I don't see so much of that, unfortunately, happening. I'm sorry, this is really not directed towards this panel. I'm just thinking aloud, but since we were talking about nostalgia.
Thank you, Mas Haris. Mas Rifki?
Well, thank you. I'm Rifki Muna. I'm with the Faculty of Social Science. Well, I'm very impressed for this forum we have, and we have discussed a lot of things. Very productive. We discussed about the dynamics of the elections. Dynamic means progress or regress. You know, it's part of the dynamics. But I think it's also to continue what Faris mentioned. You know, well, we could do analysis with all of our sophistications. But looking at some of the issues, to include how to use social media, revolution in social media, to use it, and also the weaponizations and so on, I think something that we are missing today, and we could discuss sometime in the future, or pay attention to that, is the, well, we don't really talk about the aspect related to the ethics and politics, you know. Well, because we can analyze anything, you know. But what is the purpose of that analysis? We have to put kind of frameworks on the importance of ethics, of the politics. Even when we are talking about social media, we need also try to put in within the framework of the ethics, you know, and also the ethics of technologies, for example, you know. So we will set up a framework or understanding on how to bring the whole of the debate, the whole of discussion into the right track in terms of putting it into well, norms, ethics, and morality, something like that. And I think without pushing into that ideas, well, we will only expressing our sophistication in analysis, you know. So this is my concern, you know. And I think as scholars, we are our duty is not only analyzing it, but we have to change something into situation which is better for the benefits of humankind. This is just my approach in understanding how the debate on political situation. So we need to give some certain section to see on the ethical issues of that, to include the ethics of technology if we are discussing about the role of social media, for example, in the elections. Because, yeah, I think that's fine for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Rifki. If I may, I would like to exercise my right to be selfish. Yeah, I have one question just to the Philippine case. Yeah, so I'm working on an article about authoritarian nostalgia as well, but I look at the case of South Korea, and in the case of the successful authoritarian nostalgia in the election of Park Geun-hye, the daughter of Park Chung-hee. Yeah? The demographic electing Park Geun-hye is overwhelmingly the elderly, in which the memory of the authoritarian past was unmediated. It's a direct experience under the dictator. Yeah? So they have all the legitimacy to say that I was okay living under the dictator. But in the case of the Philippines, the overwhelming support came from the youth. in which the memory, the nostalgia is dominantly mediated. So I was curious, the picture of the Filipinos youth portrayed by the existing research, so much about a very amenable, gullible, if you will, of Philippine youth. And if you have an empirical data measuring to what degree the Filipinos youth has certain digital literacy, if you will, I was planning to have the Philippine case as a benchmark to compare with the Indonesian case, the digital literacy of the youth. Yeah. So I wonder if you could touch a little bit upon that. How digitally literate is the Filipinos youth? Thank you.
Okay. I just cannot draw up the data now, but I think there was also a survey done before regarding the susceptibility to believing fake news. So maybe there's also a demographic aspect to it, like the age group. So we can take a look at that data to see how many percentage of the youth, at least defined in terms of 18 to 24, 25 to 30, 35 to 44 years old age groups, are susceptible to believing in fake news. But in terms of being technologically savvy in the sense that they know the features in and out of these social media platforms, we can say that the Filipino youth are really technologically savvy. Regarding the question on or the comment that overwhelming support for Bongbong Marcos came from the youth as much as it came from the elderly generation, I'm actually looking at the previous work that I wrote regarding the role of TikTok in the presidential campaign of Bongbong Marcos. So the biggest chunk of Marcos supporters came from the three youngest age groups, 18 to 24, 25 to 34, and 35 to 44, which comprise more than 56% of the voting population. These are the generations that were too young to remember or experience the martial law period, so they relied on stories from the elderly to reinforce what they read or what they see on social media. They are the most avid users of social media, and I think and I argued here that the youth or these age groups are prone to disinformation because in the Philippines there is very little or not a substantial discussion of martial law in history textbooks. That's something that we severely lack. That if you look at a typical elementary school textbook, it would just say martial law happened 1972 and then Marcos was removed from power 1986. What happened in between? No discussion or no talks about the debt, the economic crisis that we underwent through, the human rights violation. So because of the lack of the substantive discussions on the Marcos dictatorship in Philippine history lessons and textbooks, I think that affected an entire generation in terms of remembering how martial law was or how the Marcos dictatorship was. I personally, when I was in elementary school, I only looked at Marcos as a former president. I didn't even know that he was a dictator. I only learned about that when I entered college, because even the social science textbooks in high school, they don't really talk about it in that regard. So yeah, I think it's a dangerous combination, being technologically savvy but at the same time being prone to believing this information because you don't have other sources of information or available to you. So I would try to look at that, look for that survey which looked at the susceptibility of Filipinos to fake news and then forward it to you. Okay.
Yeah, just a quick response to what Maria just said. And I think you hit the nail on the head here. You know, being technologically savvy is not the same thing as being ethically aware of the concerns and implications of what you're doing. So it's like someone who knows how to drive a car very well, but doesn't understand the destructiveness of the production of cars, the pollution that it causes, right? And I think, but we have to understand that, and this applies to all technology, whether it's cars or social media. The fundamental question is, why do people want it? Why do you buy a car? Because I want to do things with it. Why do you go on social media? Because I want to do things with it. And now, when we talk about elections, suddenly everybody says, oh, young people are using, or the public are using social media. Most of the time, people use social media to order pizzas, yeah, right? It just so happens that when elections come, the same tools can be used in this way. And here's the problem, because when spreading disinformation and ordering a pizza is the same, yeah, That's the problem. And I think this is the scary thing about social media, because it equalizes human agency. All right? So whether you're ordering a Grab car, or you're buying a pizza, or you're ordering something on Amazon, or you're just putting up hate speech, it's all stuff that you do on this same thing. And the uniformity of this object is a scary thing. Yeah? And that's the discussion that I think people in general, not just young people, but people in general need to have, to go back to the point about ethics. Yeah? At what point do we inject ethics into this? You have to be able to distinguish between ordering a pizza and sending death threats to somebody else. And when you don't see the difference between the two, it's like, again, talking about young people, we live in a world now where violence has been normalized as never before. You watch Netflix and it's killing nonstop. Yeah, you watch Game of Thrones, every episode, people are burned to death, beheaded, mutated, mutilated, and it's normalized. Video games normalize murder, which one generation ago, people would not. So let's again, I'm sorry, historian speaking. So let's set this in our historical moment now. Yeah, we've actually reached a certain point where we have the oversaturation of normalized violence. So hate speech is nothing. Yeah, it's like an insult. It's like I say, I don't like your face, or I don't like your hairstyle. That's the scary thing when people cannot see that, because we have become so desensitized to this. And I think so. To have a discussion about ethics means it's a broader discussion. It includes how we normalize violence, how we normalize hate and othering and things like that. And that's why I really wish people would have a serious discussion about what is happening when we use the internet, And unfortunately, whenever we do that, we focus on things like elections. We fail to see that in our daily consumption patterns, we are doing extraordinary damage to the environment, to the world around us, to the poorer classes. All of this is happening at the same time, I mean, the whole Grab economy relies on the exploitation of the underclass, yeah? And you normalize that, yeah? You make the guy work half to death, and then you tip him 50 cents. Yeah, and that's the scary thing, and that's now become normalized. So everyone can now discriminate. Everyone can now discriminate, and you can do it legitimately through platforms that actually normalize this.
Thank you, Malinda. My students in 2014, before the election, first Jokowi terms, wrote a thesis about, we know there's a stickers, remember the Suharto small sticker stating, how about my year? How about my period? Do you remember? Enak zamanku po, something like in Javanese, saying like, life was better during my time and new order. But it does not work. It did not work for mobilizing nostalgia. At least the Indonesian case, the question is why, right? For me, the nostalgia issues is through a process of constructing the memory, the history, which means like when you construct memory, you basically also conceal something, right? It's a politics of remembering and politics of concealing. So for me, it's not just about the social media that operate, but at the same time, my guess is also, but there are a lot of projects to construct the past. In the case of Philippines, it works, but in the case of Indonesia, it only works in certain area in outside Java. And I was surprised actually at that time when my students showed that, because it was in the sticker of the truck bump. In the truck bump, it's big like, how about my time during the new order? Okay, people laugh at it, but it doesn't really become how people can connect and then drive preferences on their, in the ballot box. So the question is how, for me, why it works in Philippines and not working in other situations? Is it because of something? Another explanation, another research. Thank you.
Thank you, Malinda. I think we are very happy with the very engaging conversation. Yeah, this is great. And thank you so much for all of the audience coming in. We will have our final session. Two of leading experts in Myanmar and Timor Leste will join us through Zoom. We will have Mo Tuzar, PhD candidate, senior research fellow at ICIAS, Yusuf Ishak. Mo, thank you very much for joining us. We are very excited to have you with us here. We have Dr. Phillips here as well. And without further ado, time is yours, Mo.
Thank you very much. Good day. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I'd like to
Yes,
start
perfect.
off first by thanking the organizers, particularly UI Tiga, Gade, yourself in person, and of course my good friend and brother in learning, Phillips, for roping me in and getting me in, on this horse again that I usually periodically write around every 4 years when elections roll around. My apologies for not being able to join in person, just listening into the rich discussion, starting from the keynote address by Professor Farish Noor this morning, really is so inspiring. And I, as an aspiring historian, I'm actually looking at the intersections of personal memory with public history when it comes to the implementation of Burma's Cold War foreign policy for my dissertation, which I'm waiting to defend, by the way. The aspiring historian in me, of course, I was drinking in every drop of the observations that Professor Farish has been giving since this morning, and of course recently in this very rich discussion just before my session started with regard to, I think, the different influences that underpin how people behave and perceive elections. So for the time given to me and the topic assigned to me about elections in Myanmar, well, what can I say? I think Myanmar's always been kind of like an interesting case whenever it comes to this region of Southeast Asia and its political construct of ASEAN. So I wanted to also take a little bit of a longer view by looking at, elections past and present, to really get to the question of what do elections mean in Myanmar. And I think when I walk through what I've done so far for reviewing again, even revisiting some of my assumptions, I think the conclusions may be drawn quite clearly, but nevertheless, let me go through each of the slides in the time given to me to just explain my premises and my thought process and the research I've done, bringing everything together. So the next slide. The next slide will show what I mean by this question about what do elections mean in Myanmar, mainly because many in Myanmar, myself included, I would say, equate elections with the exercise of democracy. I think the whole practice of it, the whole process of it, the whole preparation run up to, and the celebrations that come after it, or the commiserations, these are all rituals. And I think definitely since 1990, this is how I think in the Burmese psyche, elections and democracy have been perceived and internalized. But it's not just since the 1990s. I mean, in most of our recent memory, of course, what we remember, and especially for someone like me, having participated as a first-time voter in 1990, the personal experience of elections really would date back to about 3 decades ago. But we really, again, need to look at that historical context of elections in Burma or Myanmar. There were elections during colonial times, during which people participating in these exercises also got familiar with the system, the way of competing in processes that before colonialization would have been quite alien, quite strange to the practices that they were used to. And really, it's using these learned experiences and processes to achieve the goal of state control, wresting state control from whoever had taken charge. And so we see those. There were 6 during colonial times, 3 in the decade immediately following independence in 1948. I put a slash of 1951/52 because the internal security or the stability situation in Burma at that time required that elections were held over a period of months rather than just on one D-Day alone. So there were 3 elections during the immediate post-independence year, and 4 under single-party socialist rule, which were really just rubber stamping exercises. There was no opposition, so to speak, and 2 under military rule, which had started to capture international attention, 1990, 2010, and two most recent, in our memory, conducted in a relatively freer political environment. And the two most recent, of course, is what has, I think, stuck in our mindset, mainly due to the disruption caused by the coup in 2021 on what we have all come to see as a very brief moment of democratic transition. And the coup seemed to have extinguished, the light and the hope that further steps towards democratic transition through participatory electoral democracy could achieve. So going to the next slide, I'd just like to set that, the history of elections in Myanmar. I think because of the nature of how Burma was colonized and so on, colonial times, of course, elections in colonial times were mainly a conduit for expressing aspirations for self-determination, choice, and of course, with the 1947 election, that was in preparation for independence. So it was also deciding who would lead the country after independence. Then came independence and all the tumultuous experience of decolonization and really trying to find one's voice as a newly independent nation. So that parliamentary democracy era, as we refer to it in Burma in the 1950s up to 1962, when the discussion was going on about nostalgia, I was thinking about the kind of nostalgia with which many people in Myanmar actually look back to those as golden years. But really, if we go through what was the experience then of the parliamentary democracy years, there was factionalism, there were serious concerns about secession, and the grievances held by many of the ethnic nationalities with regard to the incomplete implementation of federalism as aspirations. And of course, with the type of ethnic armed rebellions that popped up almost simultaneously with independence, the military's role as the guardian or the protector of that independence hardly won. And the whole notion of keeping the union together in terms of national integrity, keeping all the states and regions in the union together, I think that was also when this precedent of the military's view and perception of its role in the country's political life as the protector and the guardian also became very much to be entrenched, as did certain narratives and tropes, which I will go into later. So there was a coup in 1962, and then again in 1988. So all throughout these close to 50 years from 1962 through to the 2011 or 12, I would say, these were the authoritarian years. So Burma, Myanmar really went through almost half a century knowing nothing about, the exercise of, true participatory electoral democracy and being under authoritarian regimes where there was not much voice and accountability, opportunities, and the military's interest for a more institutionalized role in the country's political life just grew more entrenched. Well, there was a brief moment of being able to exercise voice and choice, and that was in 1990. Before that, of course, in 1988 was the national uprising, the national democracy uprising, people calling for a change in the system because of the crumbling socialist economy, and really also an effect of the winds of change sweeping around the globe at that time that was more towards democracy, freedom of expression, and choice. But the military coup in 1988 put an end to that democracy uprising, the democracy protests. But the military promised to convene multi-party elections and then hand over power to the party that won those elections. So there was still some hope and some trust in an electoral process that would allow the people to realize their aspirations for change, for democracy. But those promises were broken. And so distrust and disillusionment set in. And that distrust was very much prevalent again when the military regime tried to scope very much the nature and the participation of the elections in 2010 as part of its orchestrated 7-step roadmap towards democracy. So in this kind of restricted, repressed environment, nevertheless, there were still hopes hopes pinned on elections to express voice. And of course, what remains most salient to us are the historic wins by the opposition in the elections of 2015 and 2020 during that brief decade of opening and transition. Just as a quick aside, the image that I have here on screen, the banner actually reads, "Protect Democracy," and I believe this was from the 1940s or the 1950s. Going on to the next slide, this is very quickly a summary of the elections held in 1990, and that was, of course, after the State Law and Order Restoration Council had taken over in a military coup from the Burma Socialist Program Party, whose administration and whose experiment in socialism had just crumbled. And the army, the military, the Myanmar military held to its promise that it would convene elections within 2 years and hand over power. And there were multi-party elections. Political parties were allowed to register and compete. There were over 90 political parties that registered. Among them was the National League for Democracy, headed by Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. She spent most of her time in house arrest as head of the National League for Democracy, but nevertheless, that was seen as a kind of like a loose coalition of the forces for democracy. And the proxy party of the previous socialist authoritarian regime also reformed itself and competed. So in May 1990, those elections were held. It was covered. Interestingly, the military regime at that time allowed in international, regional media and observers to cover, to monitor, to walk about the polling stations and so on. The NLD won a landslide, but before the polls, the promise made by I'm still on the previous slide. Before the polls, the promise made by the Commander-in-Chief, could we go back to the previous slide, please? Made by the Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Forces to transfer power did not happen. They insisted that actually the elections were supposed to get elected lawmakers to start drafting a constitution that would be later ratified by a national convention, a referendum, and then people could then compete in elections again to form a government. So there was this disillusionment, this notion of a broken promise. But the NLD and other political parties still participated in that National Constitutional Convention, but there were disagreements. And also on the repression of, I think, critical voices with regard to the military's role in political life. So what happened was basically what we see as these precedents and parallels building up on the clauses that stick now today in the 2008 Constitution really institutionalized the Myanmar military's participation in a quote-unquote national political leadership role in the future state, and also with regard to eligibility criteria of who can lead the country. As you can see on the slide there, the criteria really rendered ineligible someone like Aung San Suu Kyi to even consider putting herself forward for that role. Moving on to the next slide. With this backdrop of the 1990 elections and its aftermath, in the next slide, you will see that in the 2010 and 2015 elections. Could we go to the next slide, please? So the 2010 and 2015 election outcomes and sentiments, I've compared two electoral maps there that are practically almost a mirror image of being painted green or red. The map in green shows the electoral map in 2010, when the military-backed Union Solidarity Development Party won a majority of the seats, and where you see the splashes in red were not the NLD, but other political parties. There was a splinter group of the National League for Democracy that competed in those elections, and a lot of people who wanted to vote for change, having no other choice, opted for that. But voter sentiment in the 2010 elections mainly ranged from apathy, either not interested or thinking that one's vote might not count. Many decisions not to vote or spoil votes were quite widespread at that time. And the civil servants and the military rank and file were also expected to make, quote unquote, the right choice. And there were a lot of transactional or pragmatic choices made with regard to what type of benefits townships and districts could receive. But as I mentioned, that map painted green basically was painted red in the 2015 elections. It's, paradoxically, if you would say, the USDP instituted wide-ranging political, economic, administrative reforms that paved the way for the NLD to rejoin the political process in by-elections in 2012, becoming the legal opposition for the first time in decades. And in 2015, I think pretty much everyone was certain that the NLD's time had come. And the question there was whether or not the USDP would cede defeat to the NLD's landslide win. It did, and there was a peaceful handover of state power. The NLD assumed office and swore in its government in 2016. Going on to the next slide. So this is just a quick schema of how the parliamentary seats looked like in 2015. The constitutional provision of the military's role in political life also required that there would be 25% of seats in any assembly, any chamber, whether it's at the union level or at state or regional level, allocated to the military. So those dots in green that you see are the 25% seats of any of the houses in parliament. But of course, in 2015, what you see is also a supermajority of red seats, red dots. These are the seats that the NLD managed to occupy. And with that supermajority, the NLD also managed to create a position for Aung San Suu Kyi as the country's de facto head of government above the president as state councillor, thereby bypassing the provision about eligibility for president. And when the motion was passed in Parliament in 2015, the military nominees, the military representatives, I should say, the military appointed lawmakers stood up in objection. And nevertheless, the vote was carried because of the majority. And in Myanmar, under the 2008 constitution, it is not the direct election of president or the head of government or state. It is the parliament that votes for it and elects it. And the military lawmakers are also given one nominee. So there are three nominees put forward for vice president, and then people cast votes in parliament, and the one with the winning vote then becomes president, and the other two become vice president 1 and vice president 2. Going on to the next slide. 2020, now I think these are the elections that will be most recent, most fresh in people's minds. The NLD again won a second landslide, not unexpected. I think most of the analysts, myself included, we were looking at the NLD would still win a majority, but because ethnic political parties and other political parties had been trying to form mergers and alliances, even including the USDP, to garner more seats in parliament. We thought that the NLD's majority would not be so much. But I think popular sentiment and commitment, I think, to seeing, the NLD's chance at reforms through, again, you see the electoral map. Again, it was painted red. So there was an overwhelming vote for the NLD, even in the ethnic areas where there were ethnic political parties standing, for their own region's interests and so on. So that was interesting, and that also, I think, highlighted something about performance legitimacy. Obviously, people in these ethnic areas felt that the NLD's administrative machinery and the township district level services provided were more responsive than in the past, and they thought that they could place more faith in this kind of centrally coordinated mechanism, which yielded quite interesting views. But there were also other performance legitimacy concerns because of the freer space for for raising voice and accountability issues. There were more critical voters and views expressed. And of course, that was probably seen also as people not having so much faith or trust in the NLD. There were unhappiness over bread and butter issues, and let's not forget the 2020 election was held during the time of the pandemic. So these bread and butter issues, coping mechanisms during the pandemic, of course, exacerbated people's frustrations. There were also frustrations over the ongoing conflicts and the inevitable consequences of, the conflict economy on the communities in those areas. And the shadow of the 2016-2017 crackdowns on the Rohingya communities in northern Rakhine State that had led to the largest exodus of the Rohingya across the border to Bangladesh, where they are still languishing in refugee camps to this day. So there were these inclusion issues. And that's the 2020 election results in a nutshell. Can we go to the next slide, please? So sentiments before the 2020 elections, what we could see between 2015 and 2020, there were more independent monitoring bodies, more civil society entities seeking to provide that kind of independent analysis and findings for credible elections to get a sense of the political pulse in the country. So the People's Alliance for Credible Elections, or PACE, is one such entity, or was one such entity. They are not active after the 2021 coup. The PACE completed a survey in July 2019 on citizens' political preferences, and they have been doing these surveys annually, almost annually since 2016. So what that survey showed is what you see on the slide. There were high levels of civic or political participation. There was high trust in political leaders, but not so much in the ethnic armed organizations, and quite low trust in social media such as Facebook. This was, of course, around the time of when I think Facebook really became the medium of both information, access to information, as well as dissemination. There was also lower trust in religious leaders in 2019, almost half, compared to a very high trust in 2016. There were more positive views about, whether or not current political situation was going in the right direction, more at the township level. So people, I think, had more positive views of what their representatives at the township level were doing. There were more interactions, I think, but I think that became more distant. Those interactions became more distant when it moved, to the state or region or to the country level. And there was not much satisfaction with lawmakers. Only about a quarter to a third thought that lawmakers were doing their job in parliament. And the NLD's salience as the political party best representing people's interests wasn't very high, but among about 6 political parties, that the salience there was much higher than, when the question was asked about, is the NLD the political party best representing your interests? And again, there was a mix of voter apathy or inability to vote, as the last bullet point in this slide summarizes. If we could go on to the next slide. For sentiments after the 2020 elections, after the NLD's second landslide win, of course, there was optimism and euphoria to the extent where I think, everybody else just didn't count. I think, that was the sentiment. And there was a lot of breaking of safe distancing rules for people who wanting to celebrate the NLD's electoral victory, gathering outside the NLD's office in Yangon to celebrate the election win. And not soon after the confirmation of the election results, there were accusations of election fraud from the Myanmar military and pro-military entities. The USDP lodged 800 claims of alleged electoral fraud following legal channels. And there were also calls for convening a special parliamentary session to discuss the fraud, but those calls were dismissed, and the NLD appointed Union Election Commission also denied electoral fraud allegations. And this was all happening in an increasingly tense atmosphere where the military actually came out to support these claims of electoral fraud, and at one point in time even talked about not ruling out a coup. So going on to the next slide, the coup happened, and there's a lot about a lot of the discussions about what happened after the coup, and I don't need to dwell on it, but in the context of what we are gathered in the room and virtually today, in the context of elections, because electoral fraud was the main rationale for the military's staging a coup on the 1st of February 2021, the points that later became the State Administration Council Military Regime's 5-point roadmap really focused on sort of righting this wrong about vote rigging and so on, and very similar to past promises by previous military entities and military regimes at the helm of government. The State Administration Council also promised to convene elections and handing over power to the winning party, quote unquote, meeting norms and standards of democracy. And I think the conflation that these elections would be held within a 1-year time frame was because the military announced a 1-year state of emergency. So everybody assumed or interpreted that as the timeline for holding elections, but the military has been extending that state of emergency twice now, in 2022 to 2023, and in 2023 now to the end of January 2024. So the reasons given are, there are extraordinary circumstances, and even though the Constitution doesn't really provide for extension of a state of emergency for more than two terms, I think the extraordinary circumstances, quote unquote, are being used as the reason for basically scoping the timeline to suit interests. Going on to the next slide. This is a kind of a map that I have asked the permission of a young Kachin politician whose team was monitoring the protests against the coup that rose up between 8th to 17th of February in 325 townships. And so you will see in these townships, this map of where protests against the coup rose up in the 2 weeks immediately following the coup in 2021, February. You will see practically a mirror image of the NLD's win in the 2020 elections. Going on to the next slide. This is just a map from ACLED tracking anti-coup demonstrations. And again, this shows the widespread, I think, pushback against what people have perceived. Yet another imposition of military rule, yet another broken trust, and a bleak political future. Next slide, please. So sentiments and choices post-2021, I think there is a lot of literature, discussion, articles, analyses out there about Gen Z voices leading the anti-coup protests, and they are the digerati. They leverage their digital literacy to function as citizen journalists of sorts, at first using different social media platforms to give information about where these peaceful protests would be held. But later on, when the military started cracking down, those kinds of, I think, information sharing stopped. But there were also very much coded or veiled updates and information about where there were deployment of the military's security forces and so on to crack down on protests. And of course, later on, starting 19th of February, when the military started firing into crowds of peaceful protesters, also the very tragic images of citizens suffering in the crossfires. And of course, the Generation Z learned from veteran activists, those in 1988, those who were student leaders themselves in 1988, to expose, using social media, what is called the military's chaos narrative or chaos tropes. That have been used in past decades to kind of to divide and sow confusion, and also just point to undesirable elements, quote unquote, fomenting dissent or fingering NLD politicians as people being behind the dissent and so on. And of course, these efforts using social media platforms have been countered by the military's psychological warfare capabilities. So sentiments post-2021, there are renewed aspirations and moves for a federal future. It's interesting to note that the NLD, after its 2020 win, talked about forming a national unity government to have more ethnic and civil society inclusion, and also committed to this vision of a democratic federal union. But after the 2021 coup, what has emerged in the resistance movement, and of course, people voicing their desire for federalism, is first, elected NLD lawmakers taking the National Unity Government name to form a parallel entity that is more inclusive than the NLD was in its first administration, and also the enunciation of a vision of a federal democratic future, which is slightly different from the NLD's emphasis on democratic federal. And so now the emphasis is federal democracy. And of course, I think we're all much aware of the spiral of violence that has been created in response to the military's violent crackdown on protesters. I think I've talked about the historical experience that created distrust in the military's promises for elections. And there was an opinion poll conducted discreetly in the first half of 2023 by a renowned research institute, not a Myanmar entity. And what those findings yielded, as shared by some of my activist contacts, that 72% are unlikely to participate in any projected polls by the State Administration Council. But there are differing opinions on commitment to democracy, which I think also reflect the kind of difficult situations that people face having to cope with the consequences of the coup. As you can see, it's almost equally divided, one-third about people still committed to sacrifice everything to restore democracy, people wanting to continue with the resistance struggle but suffering from lack of income, and there are people who still think that military is acting in the country's best interests. Going on to the next slide. This is, I think, one of the last slides. So what is the situation now? The Union Election Commission under the NLD, of course, which denied the allegations of voter fraud. When the military took over in the coup in 2021, the UEC chief and secretary were detained, but later released after 20 months in detention. And the State Administration Council's Union Election Commission, appointed soon after the coup, nullified the 2020 election results in July 2021. And this year, we have seen a lot of moves and preparations towards projected polls. There have been a new political parties registration law announced earlier this year, but very tall and rather unrealistic qualifying criteria, which you can see in the slide there that's been listed. And of course, with that kind of a bit unrealistic qualifying criteria for many political parties, and because of, I think, the way in which the whole, the nature of the coup has been, the NLD and leading ethnic political parties, some of those political parties have decided not to register, and as a result have been dissolved. But as of this month, the State Administration Council's Election Commission has approved 37 out of the 63 political party registrations. There was a recent meeting in Naypyidaw with these parties to discuss next steps about opening party offices and preparing for elections. About 40 parties have been dissolved. And the State Administration Council is also making preparations for conducting a census next year. including an electronic ID system as part of that census. And we have been hearing observations from senior members of the USDP, the military-backed political party, stating that elections are likely to be held in 2025, which, by the way, is also the time, of the lapse of the 5-year time frame between the 2020 and the 2025 elections. So the screen grab of this Twitter by a researcher now based in the United States basically highlights that the parties which did not register with the State Administration Council's election commissions were those that had actually won a majority of the votes in the 2020 elections, and those that have been, re-registered and approved are those that only won about over 10% of the vote. Going on to the next slide, please. I'm conscious of taking up the time, and this is the last slide. So I think I will try to investigate and analyze further what are the issues and implications surrounding these projected elections, which have, been shifted from 2022 to 23 to now possibly 2025. And these are the kind of questions that I think everyone will be asking as the State Administration Council military regime has also sought to introduce proportional representation, which was a proposal that did not find much traction when it was first raised in Parliament in Myanmar in around 2013, 2014. So I'll stop here and yield back the time with apologies if I've gone over time.
Thank you, Mo. Again, I would kindly request everyone to hold questions. We have the final presentation from Ms. Sildonia Sarmento from Timor Leste. Let us see if Ms. Donia is ready. Ms. Donia, are you there? Are you ready?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Let me check if our technician has your PowerPoint. Okay, fantastic. Ms. Donia, time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you again. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you, UI3, for having me today in this great such events. And it is an honor for me to learn and to listen from experts from around Southeast Asia's countries. And I'm speaking here as an independent consultant who has been work for a long time to accompany the process of democracy in Timor Leste. As you know, our country, Timor Leste, we just achieved the formal independence in May 2022. So without further explanations, I will just limit my presentation today. It's about parliamentary election in 2023, presently happened in Timor Leste. Especially, I would like to see how assessing democratic consolidation and political participations. Coming back, one thing is very interesting when I follow this conversation this morning. One word that I keep, it's always in my head. It's like election is like a party. It's like a pesta. It's yes. I am the person that I always follow what exactly the political parties rally, doing monitoring, going through, meet with the leaders. So this is sometimes happen. So let me share what I have written here to you all, and then I welcome for any questions. Yes, to start, we are also colonization's country, and then as you know that given these times, the process of accessing the democracy and political participation, sometimes it's not really easy. But Timorese, we are getting there. We are getting there. We can say that, I can say, my personal view, start from zero, but now we are getting there. And we believe that as a Timorese. The parliamentary elections recently happened in my country. This is the process that we believe that it will shape the future of the country. My presentations will analyze the parliamentary election in Timor Leste, focus on democratic consolidations and political participation. Timor Leste is relatively young nations. We just gained independence in 2002, and since then, it has made significant strides in building democratic system. Why is building democratic system? Because it's a nation that post-colonial. So things has happened there. And then we see that this parliamentary election is provide opportunity to evaluate progress made and then identify challenges that need to be. So next slide. Next slide, please. So as I say, the election recently is parliamentary election, just May 23 is happened. We have 17 party that registers, but actually we just have 4 most party that it's going to the elections. It's first, I can see that Fretilin. Fretilin is a historical party, and then Liberal Party, People's Liberal Party, PLP, is a new party. Kunto is a new party, but it's like of the young people mostly. My personal view, this is mostly martial arts. It's involved there in this party called Kunto. And then we have Democratic Party, PD, which this has been built since Indonesian time there in Timor, because mostly people involved in this party, the PD, Democratic Party, they came from student movement during their been studying in Indonesia. So they come back and then they create this kind of party. And then lastly, the CNRT. As you know, that CNRT is the National Congress for Timor-Leste Reconstructions. Is really it's opposition party before, but it's held the presidency because the current president, President Ramos Horta, it's been supported by CNRT before he held the presidency. If you ask who is inside the CNRT, inside CNRT is our charismatic person, Mr. Shanana Guzmão, who's on this CNRT party. So the 2023 parliamentary election is the 5th parliamentary election happened since independence. So I can see overall the parliamentary election in 2023 is conducted by peace, genesis, and transparency. And it is successfully managed by Timorese institutions. We have these 2 bodies is under government, but the state, the electoral body, we have state Secretary of State for elections, and we also have National Commission for Elections. So these 2 bodies. One is to monitor the Comissão Nacional de Eleições. There's the one is to monitor the process, and also they have appointed 5 commissaries there with different. So they will be going to each past we call district, but now we call municipality. So they have covered those municipality to oversee what exactly has happened in this municipality during the election. So they only do their work during election, and the state. This Secretariat Técnico de Administração Estatal is under Ministry of State Administrations. They manage the logistic and everything. They are a government body, but they work independently. Yeah. Next slide. So, as we adopt multi-party system as provided by Timor Leste Constitution. This we can see, as I come back to before I said it, there is 70 political parties in 2023 parliamentary election. Why is 17 political parties want to compete for this? Because, come back, my personal view, it's when coming to the election, is going to elections everyone's, like the leaders, academic, or any empresario maybe, or anything. They would like to compete. They would like to take the government. They would like to be part of the government, or they would like to have power in their hand. So it's like it's called pesta, but it's like this. So everyone would like to. So we have many. But at the end, because of there is many rules there, so it's only like those party before that I mentioned just came to the elections. So come back again just to mention, CNRT and Fretilin are the most recognized two major political party in Timor Leste. They are both, come back again just to mention, CNRT, those two party, people will mostly go to these two parties. First, because of CNRT, they have Shonana Guzman, which we also call Mambot. It's really charismatic person. And then Fretilin, I may say that because of the historical party, for a long history, people with long history attached to this party. So no matter who is lead the party, as long as they know that this is the history party, the long history party. But it's for now maybe it's a question. What after that? What's the leader still there? Who is after that? Who is going to this one? We are in 2003 and 2023. And then with these kind of leaders, what next? The step of political change after we don't have this kind of leaders. So this is the challenge for the party. So the final result of 2023 elections is validated. As always, we by Court of Appeal in June 23, and then we validated that. Party also released their member of the national parliament with the candidate. And then just to inform, so in Timor Leste, I know maybe in another country also happen of this happen like this. When people go to the rallies, go to the political campaign, they will bring they will bring their leaders. They will bring the politica. They will bring those that will go into the parliament. They will ask to come and then speaking at the campaign. And then next, we move to next slide. So this is the result that indicated recently, as you know, the CNRT as the lead this election with 41.6% of the votes, and then follow as it's not news if this number is happened, because people already predict when during the elections campaign it's already predict that things will going like this. Why is that? Because speaking from the governments, maybe who is governs and how the populations, the people evaluate the governments. So they may think, okay, now it's the turn for another party for this one. So you can see that it's the numbers, like seniority is increasing, the number is increasing, and then also, but Fritalin itself, we can say, my personal view, they lose the numbers. I mean, meanings that they lose the number of interests, maybe from the populations. The reason what? Maybe people in during the years, they evaluate. They want something changed. People always want something changed. So this has happened. And then PLP, that who was in the government before, lost their seat also. And also Kunto is a new party, but it's a youth. It's mostly youth there. They are considered mostly from the martial art, and then they secure their vote. And then PD also, they have significance number. So you can see in the slide that you can see the Fritalin and PLP experience of loss of 4 seats in these elections. And then the End Democratic Party, they secure their 6 seats, represent 9.3 of the vote, and increase from their 5 seats in 2000. So this is like, if you ask me, why is this number changes? My personal view say that it is because of people sometimes they want to see change. They want to see change to their life, so they try to like, okay, we are now move to another party, or we choose another party. Maybe our life will going better. This is my monitoring to the rural area. I see something like that. So next slide. So we have legal framework that the election still the same, and then even is during the election is proposed amendment for the electoral law, but still not. I think it's not happen because this amendment proposed to allow more voting hours, and then allowing postal voting, and then adopting the how do you say the braille ballot. It is not happen these parliamentary elections, and this makes especially students, I think in Indonesia, and some I forgot the country, but they are a little bit sad because they cannot vote. Because if they open for you can vote, the system in another country, or for example in America, or they can vote like wherever they can go to the polling station, or they can present their card, and then they can vote wherever. But this is not happen. Even in Timor Leste, for the process of the vote, if you want to vote, you have to come back to the place where you are. You make your electoral card. We have electoral card that if your electoral card say that you are in town, for example in Dili, he will vote there. But the electoral card said that you are in the municipality, you have to go there. This is still challenge because some people, especially those that is a business, small business things, sometimes they don't want to travel. They say, "Oh, it's done. I don't want to travel. I travel, I will lose this. I will lose my income," or things like that. So this is something that has happened during this parliamentary election also. So we also, during the election, we have an observer and systematic election observer, which observed by countries, and then or different civil society group. we have something very attractive is like political party. They have their observer, and then from civil society also they send their their observer to see the process of the election, starting from people going to ballot, going to vote, and then until the counting. So everyone is very enthusiastic, and then the observer was really good during that time. Next slide, please. So going to campaign rallies. This is very interesting, campaign rallies, because when you start to campaign rallies and campaign itself, I know that some of the speakers they mentioned about the Facebook in Timor Leste. You can see you will know one thing in a second through just Facebook. So if you want to find information, want to find anything, go to Facebook and you will find information there. So during the elections, the campaign of the elections, Facebook is really famous also because political party using there, some leaders of the political party also using Facebook. So Facebook is being around. So everything is putting there. We don't have any rules that say that you cannot say this in the Facebook or anything. Only in the prior, as always, like before the election, minutes one day or before the election, you cannot promote you cannot promote your party, you cannot promote your leader on everything. But things happen. It's always like it's there. The political rally, it's like a party. It's political rally. It's like if you are around during the election in Timor Leste, you will see everything is like really party. Yeah, because it's party. People say it's party, and then everyone let's go there. Even they said that the minority, like those they cannot bring to the forest, but people will bring their daughter, small one, and they just go there to see. Because it's really fun, and then there is a music, there is things, there are track around, everything. It's like it's really making it a party. It's like that. So we don't know that those that coming there, the followers, is really follow what exactly the leaders are talking, or what exactly their potential candidate to be the member of the parliament or governments talking, or they just go there to sing out. These things need to, during the time, we need to see exactly. This is, we can educate the populations how exactly they vote because of the program or they vote because of the leaders. This is the challenge. So move to the next slide. So it's we as Timorese, we see that these elections is a prior for it's a democratic consolidations because we consider it's because of our long story from the also post-colonialism, and then there's political change during Indonesian there until 75. We see that this is marked as a process, and then as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, the process is there, and now we're working to figure out which part of democracy consolidation we are up to. So again, I want to say that since gaining independence, the country has successfully conducted several elections, start from the presidential elections, the parliamentary election, and now currently, speaking about the election, we are now in the election for the chief of Sukuch, like RT, there now. It's the process is now. So these parliamentary elections, why is really important? Because some people say that this is the time for all leaders, their time to prove again their leadership during the years. So the leaders now who govern Timor Leste is those that came from the struggles time. So those that leaders of the party, they came from the struggle time, except the culto, the culto. So that's why I again want to see that we are in the process of consolidations, our political, and also in the same time we are feels that we are done some process, and the process is with transparent, inclusive, and fair so far. Move to next slide. See, political participations. Timorese people, they participate very active because they would like to talk politics. Actually, they see that every corner. If you even now, it's not the election time, but people will start talking about things. When you come to the elections, everyone will talk about how they will participate, which political party they want to. So they want to express, their think, and then want to participate more. So I can see from my monitoring during the elections, it's like the participation of the citizen is very good. Yeah, even I say before, it's like we cannot adjust that they participate because of the leaders, the program or what, but they know that they have to vote. They know that they have to vote, and then they see that they want challenge. This is something that we have to think. Want to vote and want the challenge there. They want things changed instantly. Sometimes like that. So, but increase the participation so far until now is increasing from time to time. So next slide. So I go to challenge and recommendations. Even we have many successful elections that we as a Timorese can manage, but challenge is there. As I mentioned before, we need to strengthen the institutions. We need to strengthen more the institution that who manage the elections. For example, these institutions that under governments like Minister of State, for example, we have the secretary, like technical secretary for the election, and we have national election for commissions and also. And we need to strengthening in order to do more, and then to have more participations. This is including the challenge is how we improving electoral laws. Do we need to do amendment for the law, the electoral laws in order to allow more people access, especially the like recently happened, people outside, sometimes they cannot vote, like for specific country. For example, we have many, like a lot of students in Indonesia, but they cannot vote. They have to go back. They have to go back to the country to vote, and some will not do that because of any circumstances. So why not we organize the things in Indonesia or in other country to vote. They just vote directly, as I say, that use their electoral card and then go directly, and then just send someone from Timor here to monitor, or we have someone, some observer from another country or wherever, just to monitor that. With that, I think we can improve, and then we can see we can respond to the challenge. And then one thing, in my personal view, we need to see that the transparency of the campaign financing. Who is financing us there? It's already like those campaign with a lot of expenses. Who is financing there? Is there any transparency for this kind of process? So, as independent consultants, we see this a challenge that sometimes it's also not easy. And also, there is need to promote political awareness, like engagement, even though there is a lot of community and then people participation, but we need to engage more populations, particularly young youth people, and then community. And then we need to do more like civic education program. We have NGOs, some NGOs there, and then it's very active during the civic education program. But I think need more, just to remind people, and then to be more engaged the community, especially youth, with the process of the election itself and how to exercise their right. So that is. Next slide, the last slide. So this is my last slide, and then I make a conclusions that again I just want to say that parliamentary election recently done is really a significance that we can prove our democratic participations, and then it also opportunity to access opportunity to assess the progress made since independence. So we are assess what exactly we are already aim to, and then did we are able to get all the result that we promises that we are going to have. That beside that, this also will connect with our national development plan. So that's why I say that we are on the process of assess progress made since independence, and then we'll try to improve the areas that need to improve. This we will strengthen democratic institutions and promoting inclusivity, encourage political engagement. Timor Leste will continue on its path towards a more robust and vibrant democracy. The international community should support and closely monitor elections, and with the observers, and then with that we will also play a crucial role in shaping the national future. Without further adding, this is my presentations. I thank you very much. I would like to have questions that are from the participant, and then from the from all the participants. So I thank you again. I thank you very much, and then this is really good opportunity for me to share and also to learn from others' country. This is I'm really honored for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Dania. Finally, we have our final Q&A. I'd like to gather questions from the floor. Please do raise your hand. Dr. Koo?
I have questions to Sildonia in regards to Timor Leste's elections. Can I just hear, I know, Timor Leste has always been labeled as democratic countries. Nevertheless, I think there's a lot of features that require a bit of a critical analysis, and because it is really interesting inside Timor Leste itself. I just would like to ask questions regarding to this political developments where you have Sanana Gusmao returning as your prime minister, but at the same time you have also the former prime minister and so forth becoming your president, Jose Ramos Horta. So the debates is always in Timor, you continue having all the veterans dominating the political scene despite of very democratic elections. Can you explain to us what is your observation and what is your analysis looking at this sort of trend? And my second question is, in the recent in the recent elections, parliamentary elections, we also witnessed Sanana brought his son to everywhere for political campaigns. And what is your view on this? Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Koo. Any more questions from the floor? I think Ms. Donia can answer first. Oh, just a minute. We have one question from.
I'd like to ask Mo Suzar. It's good to see you again on screen. You mentioned that there's a discussion about the adoption of proportional representation system for the next election. Why do you think that proposal comes up again? I suspect it is coming from the military, because you know, if it is first past the post system, they could not win the popularity contest with NLD. So that's why now they are proposing this PR system that would serve their interest, I think, more. But I don't know what would be your analysis on that.
Thank you, Dr. Fairmonte. I think we'll give the chance for Ms. Donia and Ms. Tuzar to answer. Maybe Ms. Donia first, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I answer first questions. My observations, yes, in Timor Leste, there is, because of the struggle for a long time, veterans is still like play important roles there. Veterans that are now on in Timor Leste, they are solid, and they are like, we can say like, oh, you are veterans, okay, you know that this one, I should hear you. Come back. Mr. Shanana and Ramos Horta, they have two different roles, I can see, because of what? Mr. Shanana is the prime minister, Mr. Ramos Horta is the president. They have different roles, but they work together. Why they work together? You don't ask me about, maybe the mind is like, did Shanana's influence Ramos Horta, the president, for any decisions? I don't think so. Yeah, because they have different roles in the government. From outside perspective, sometimes maybe we can see like that because of the charisma. People say that if people call Mambot, it's like Shanana is the Mambot. If some Nana say this, and then everyone will follow that. But actually, things like not like that. Everyone, they have their portions of how to govern. Ramos Horta will have his piece of how to perform his mandate as the president, and then Prime Minister Shanana. But they have to work together because of what? The history of the presidency Mr. President Ramaphosa has been supported by CNRT in the past to be there as a president. This is why things always like mixing. I hope I can answer the questions. A second, about the son of Shanana, Mr. Shanana. It's everyone can argue. I have 2 points. It's reflect my personal view. First, Mr. Shanana, Mambot Shanana, he want to bring his son to go there and learn what exactly he's doing with the people, with his people. As long as Shanana's, I think Mr. Shanana's son has been living outside, living in Australia. He just come to Timor. He have to learn. He have to learn what exactly his father has been there with the community, going through the community. It's really the community there. He want to teach his son. This is another life of, you are in Australia, you come back to Timor, this is the life of Timor Leste people. And then I want to teach you, this is my personal view. Mr. Shanana think, I want to put you there because you need to start learning. You need to start learning maybe how to be as a good leader in the future. Can be, because it's like the process of integrating, and the step of it's teaching by experience and by doing. He's doing, I think, most days he's doing the things that some youth, they will see and they will follow. Because of the, but we cannot say that this is not because of the charisma, because this is the charisma of Mr. Shanana itself. And then he want to teach his sons, going there and then try to learn what exactly so far, what I'm with the community, going to the, sorry for the dirty place there, going to take all the things that people are not able, going to the, it's like Selokan, it's really dirty, people not clean all the sampah, let's go there. So he's going there. And then currently he put his son on the place that it requires learning. Everyone can do that. But this one actually, I totally agree with your, many people do the protest. Why is that? Why is this one? Why should this one? Everyone welcome. In democracy, everyone welcome to say their opinion. But as long as leaning there, people should follow. That's my opinion. I hope I answered the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Donia. Ms. Tuzar, please, time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Phillips, for the question. Yes, proportional representation, the USDP, the Union Solidarity Development Party, brought it up in Parliament in 2014, just before the 2015 elections. And of course, I think the NLD, which was then in opposition, the legal opposition, wasn't too keen on that, mainly because, of course, this is another way of ensuring that with the 25% presence of military-appointed lawmakers in Parliament, with probably the proportional representation system, the USDP, together with some ethnic political parties or its associate affiliate parties, might seek to scrape a majority. So I think there was that reluctance. But interestingly enough, the USDP's proposal in 2014 was quietly dropped. And so that led to some speculations of whether or not there had been some kind of back channel deals and so on. And of course, in 2014, when that was first tabled in Parliament, I think the interest of the NLD was not just to win with the current, first past the post system in the 2015 elections, but also looking forward to making changes. So interestingly enough, I think there were also suggestions to consider it, and I think the NLD's position has always been not under the current constitutional setup where there is this preferential 25% of votes in parliament that would not work in say the NLD's favor or the favor of any party that is not part of I guess the broadly the military, the pro-military kind of alliance, if you will. Of course, now the State Administration Council has reintroduced that. Senior General Min Aung Hlaing has endorsed it, and so they're discussing it. I think they have the military's Union Election Commission has been discussing this with political parties in Naypyidaw. But at this point in time, we're not certain what type of proportional representation system is the regime advocating. I think on the website of the Union Election Commission, there's some kind of promotional material in the Myanmar language on what does proportional representation mean. But as we know, there are different forms, and at this point in time, we don't know what type of form or mechanism that the SAC will think about. But it's back on the table now. Interestingly enough, there was a hypothetical simulation done by the Salween Institute, I think around 2015, that tried to look at if there was a proportional representation system, how would the NLD and other political parties have fared? And I think that hypothetical simulation actually found that the NLD still would have won a majority, but there would be, of course, more seats for the USDP, but not that many seats. And I think they just ran it for certain constituencies, maybe the Yangon urban area and also Shan State. So it was selected, it was limited. But nevertheless, I've been reading reports about it, and it's quite interesting to find that there were actually hypothetical simulations run on whether or not the incumbent political party at that time needed to be concerned very much about proportional representation. But it's an interesting development nevertheless.
Thank you, Ms. Tuzar. I'm welcoming questions again from the floor, if any. If there is no question, I might have some questions for Mo Tuzar and Ms. Doniaya, if you will. The way I understand it from your presentation, it seems like elections in both Myanmar and also Timor Leste do not produce new government or new leadership, yeah? Am I correct? Yes, yeah? Which means it's problematic to see elections from the lens of democratic theory, because the function of election is actually to have peaceful transfers of power, probing public opinion regarding what kind of leadership they want and who they want to lead this time. If you produce exactly the same leaders over and over again, I wonder if we would best see elections differently in those two countries, yeah. What do actually elections serve, the function of election in your countries, if you will? If that makes sense, my question. Thank you. Maybe Ms. Tuzar would love to chip in, yeah? What do elections function?
Okay, just a very
in
quick answer, because I think Sidonia would have, I think much more to analyze given Timor-Leste's experience. I think in Myanmar's experience, it's still so new and nascent, which is why I pointed to the 2015 and 2020 elections as quote-unquote historic wins. And I think in one of my earlier analyses, I even put the 2015 elections in Myanmar as a significant political event for Southeast Asia, because it did produce a new government, a government, I guess, that had been waiting for 3 decades to assume power. And it was, I think, also a vindication of sorts for the then incumbent USDP that they actually ceded defeat and effected a peaceful transition of power. So it's I mean, I would say, Gade, probably the jury is a bit out because it's, like I said, we only have 2015 and 2020 to go by. But certainly looking at the kind of voter sentiment and behavior in these two elections, people still exercise their choice as to, more emotionally. And of course, there's always an element of emotion in the elections. I mean, the NLD, of course, in 2015 didn't have any performance legitimacy to stand by, only the kind of policies and their promises of what they would do should they be elected. And when the NLD didn't seem to be able to deliver on those campaign, those platform promises in their first term as government, the electorate was still willing to give the NLD a second turn. So I don't have empirical data, or I don't have enough data points. But if we just look at the pure emotions that drive sentiments, and in Myanmar, with all the historical weight and baggage, and all the parallels and precedents that I've been kind of trying to trace, it does point to, I think, something in the people's psyche in Myanmar that they just do not want that outsized role of the military in the country's political life, even though that has been how the military has tried to structure it since the aftermath of the 1990 election. So I'm not sure if that addresses what you mentioned, but I think it's important to qualify that I think Myanmar's experience, it's somewhere still like that brief decade of transition. I think we still needed to test it more.
Thank you, Ms. Uzar. I think I'm the one who learned a lot with your explanation. Thank you. Ms. Donia? I think you're still muted, yeah. Maybe you need to unmute.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I just want to see that this is the art of democracy in Timor Leste perspective. That's the point. So, yes, the leaders not changed, but there is, from the theory, we can say that which part of democracy that Timor Leste has been through in these days. But we see this as a transition, democracy. We've been in democracy system. We are in transitions to be more democratic. What I mean by that, democratic with the leaders, even the leader changes, but the process of how to become a leader is there. It's been chosen by populations. He's not sitting there with just choose by himself. That's the art, the thing that we as a Timorese, we see that. Why is still there? They just change position, right? Someone to be a president, and then soon someone would to be a prime minister. They just change the positions. But the art is people choose them. People use the right of their vote to vote exactly without pressures in every ballot, confidential, to choose that. There is a political rally, there is a political campaign, but we come to the ballot, you choose your own leader, who you want. At least there is no pressure to people to vote, that you should go and vote to these leaders. You should go and vote to this party. Things happen, maybe. Things happen. I cannot say that it's not happen at all. But yes, it's happened. Maybe one case, two cases is happened. But again, I want to prove that the people choose him. The people want him to be a leader. The people want this party, want the leaders, and also want the party. This is the art of our democracy, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Donia. If there is no more questions from the floor, I think I can give the time to our Dean, Dr. Fremonte, to deliver closing remarks.
All right. Thank you. This is just to close the, I think it's been a very amazing and interesting conversation that we have since the morning. I'd like to thank you all for staying. And actually, this is our plan to have a very intimate conversation on what's going on in Southeast Asia in terms of election. If I may, I do have some notes because all the speakers throughout the sessions have, I think, helped us at this Faculty of Social Sciences shaping and reshaping our research agenda. Because from your presentations and from the discussions that follow, I have a lot of notes that I think we will continue discussing at this Faculty of Social Sciences, as there are a lot to be follow up in terms of research. I noted the statement by Dr. Rifki Muna and Farish that on the ethical, I think this discussion, we try to combine the academic research, and from the presentation we could see that there are policy implications of what we are doing in terms of research. So that's the first point I'd like to make. Second point is that if we are talking about Southeast Asia, because this is going to be a series on Southeast Asia, it goes without saying that we are so diverse. Southeast Asia is so diverse. Some are in democracy, some experiencing going back and forth on democracy, authoritarian government, going back to democracy, and then going back to authoritarianism again, as Mosuzar showing us the experience of Myanmar, having those 17 elections already since 1920s. That must be some collective memory there, actually. And some currently experiencing regression in terms of their democracy. One of these countries, according to some observer, of course, maybe Indonesia, and I don't know, maybe Malaysia, jury is out. Third point I'd like to make, if I use this traditional approach in political science, looking at the three perspective, institution, structure, and culture. In terms of institution, I think this discussion generates more questions than answering, which is good. I think in every discussion, we should have more questions coming up rather than answering the question. The questions about whether or not electoral system affect all these political behaviors of actors and the electorates and voters and so on. From Pak Jayadi's presentation and Art Punchada's presentation and Elise Mendoza presentation, clearly there are similarities and differences of outcome and consequences of presidential system and parliamentary system. That would be, I think, a fertile ground for more studies in Southeast Asia, because studies like this mostly coming from Latin American experience, not so much from Southeast Asia. So I think there are a lot of opportunities in terms of theory building that we can gain from exchange like this. Whether or not political setup, right, will affect in terms of policies and in terms of change. I learned a lot from the case of Thailand, and Art showed us how the system, district system and party list system provide you different outcome for some parties, but move forward parties continue to benefit from that kind of system. So I suspect actors and in Thailand will learn, and then they will adjust accordingly, which I think the general trend that we've seen from the all presentation, actually these politicians are so damn smart, right? Coming to my fourth point, they all right now seems to understand the psychology of the masses. Duterte understand the psychology of the masses. Bongbong, I believe also same thing. Jokowi here, same thing. They are all able to capitalize on their understanding of how the masses think and their psychology. So I think that's why my fourth point, we need to engage, because this is political science, engage with other disciplines. And we are so lucky, and I think we made the right decision to have Professor Farish Noor as our keynote speaker, giving us the historical context. For him and maybe for us now, nothing new under the sun. It's been happening from a long time ago, right? The tendency to be corrupt or the tendency to expand power. I think history tells us again and again. What's different when we are talking about social media, it's a new thing, but as Professor Farish rightly pointed out, if we think about it in the form of hate speech has been going on since maybe forever. Now it is the social media and the technology gives the multiplying effect, but the basis and the understanding is probably the same, and it's the sensitizing effect of social media. I think that's some more important issues to be tackled, because Professor Farish noted in a country like Southeast Asia, where we have plural society, fragmented society, social media normalizes violence. And I think this is one aspect that requires a lot of research in the future. In terms of structure, what's interesting about today's presentation, I got from Linda's presentation. She has one slide on how well we are in terms of the economy. I think Southeast Asia now is the region with the highest economic growth. On average, if I'm not mistaken, is we are all growing by 5%, right? Some 6%, some 4%, some 5%. So on average, about 5% is, I think, the highest in the world. And now this is the difficult part. Philippines has done very well since Bongbong in terms of economic growth. So this is about a question of a political competition as well, right? Performance legitimacy. Some of you mentioned about this performance legitimacy. So these political actors learn as well how to really legitimize their power, and this is where the difficult part comes in. Anwar Ibrahim did not so well, I think, in terms of the economy. If we look at the data, in Indonesia, President Jokowi has done very, very well despite of the pandemic and so on. So this is the question again of performance legitimacy, and I believe now this is my fifth point, because we did not really talk about the international effects or the international factors, how it influences the political dynamic. I would suspect in the Philippines, the question about South China Sea with China affect people's mood as well, because Duterte and Bongbong Jr., I think, advocated a very contrasting policies, and it affect the psychology of the people. When you're talking about securitization of the policy, suddenly it hits that kind of narrative as well. On the cultural part, some of you mentioned about the collective memory, why people keep forgetting about violence, but at the same time, I think the regression of democracy, according to the presentation by Elise Mendoza, is that there's not much about the authoritarian period of Philippines in the textbooks, in education. So there's this part of socially constructed historical reality that has been used by all this regime. And then we are lucky in Indonesia, maybe, I don't know, I have, we have more discussion on the how Suharto did during the 32 years of his power, and it is in our textbook. But I don't really know about the Philippines. But I think the question of civic education that Timor Leste has experienced as well is very much an area of research. So learning from this, I think engaging with other discipline, political psychology. I would imagine somebody from psychology department would want to do research on this, right? How the masses and authoritarianism, and how we can understand the would-be technocrats, would-be autocrats, understand the masses psychology. Lastly, I think it was fascinating to learn about Singapore. I've been always thinking there's not much dynamic in Singapore, to be frank. But I think Singapore is going to transition. Eugene noted that for Singapore, this is transition of leadership since Lee Kuan Yew. It would be very interesting post Lee Kuan Yew family, leadership in Singapore, whether or not Singapore would change significantly or to better or worse, we don't know. But transition has been the theme as well. Many of you spoke about transition. In Thailand, it's a generational transition. Singapore is a transition of democracy. Timor-Leste, nation building. So we are all in transition. I hope we are not hitting the wall. So we always be in the transition period. We're not getting there. We keep transitioning from something to something without making so much progress. Yung Hui noted that in the experience of Malaysia and probably Indonesia too, we move one step forward, but we move two step backward. So in the Indonesian term, it's like pocho-pocho, right? Dance. We move one move forward, one step forward, two step to the right, two step to the left, and then two step backward, and then in the end we are walking around the bush. We are not moving somewhere. Lastly as well, there are similarities and differences, which is, I think, for our students who are still here, maybe there are a lot of cases that we can compare and contrast between Southeast Asian experience. Philippines are longing for discipline and strongman, if I understood correctly from the presentation. But at the same time, Jayadi Hanan put up a slide showing how Indonesians do not want strongmen. And why is that the case? And then with different result, right? Although we are experiencing the same problem, right? We face the same challenges and so on. So my point would be, I hope we can continue this conversation through more cooperation. We would love to have cooperation with Mahidol University and Yung Hui's University Malaya and UP, of course. We have cooperation with Gajah Mada University, our big brother. We are looking for protection from big brother Gajah Mada, so we are not bullied, because this is new university. So we need to kowtow with big university. So thank you very much. That's my note, just for food for thought, and we can continue the conversation. I would like to thank once again Luminate for providing us with the support, and Asia Foundation. And to all participants, thank you very much for staying with us. I hope we can see you again next year for the second Southeast Asia update, hopefully, and we will plan. But this one, I forgot to mention this morning that the papers, we are planning to publish them in international journal. So tomorrow morning for speakers, we have workshop, and to think about where we're gonna do this, and then plan out which journal, and maybe incorporating suggestions from the discussion. Lastly, Pak Gede, thank you very much, and please give him round of applause for maybe he's been bugging you with emails and WhatsApp. I hope now you forgive him, because I think this has been a very fantastic experience for us here at UII. Thank you.
With that note from Dr. Fremonte, our Dean, we are happy to close our first day of the conference. Thank you so much for our leading scholars, speakers, esteemed guests, our donor, Luminate, Ms. Dinita Putri, and the Asia Foundation, Mas Mustafa, and our promising students at the back end of the road, lecturers as well. Thank you so much. Big applause to all of us. And maybe photo session, yeah. Thank you also to IT team, very solid and high-skilled technicians, yeah. And also to those leading scholars joining us through Zoom, Ms. Motuzar and Ms. Hildonia Sarmento, thank you so much for your time. And hopefully we'll meet again, yeah, in another occasion. Thank you so much. Yeah. Photo session, yeah, perhaps, yeah. I think we can take photos with Ms. Tuzar and Ms. Hildonia as well. Is that possible? With the background, yeah. I think that's possible, yeah. For the speakers, yeah. I'd like to invite the speakers to come forward and take photos together, yeah. Mas Faris, let's go take some picture first, yeah? This is actually perfect, Ms. Motuzar and Mr. Donia, yeah? We can have you in the screen. Ms. Tuzar and Ms. Hildonia, thank you so much again for your participation. And see you next time, yeah? Okay then, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will contact you later, yeah, regarding the proposal paper and everything. Yes.
We'll look forward to your further
Yes.
communication and advice. Thank you, everyone.
And all the administration
Thank you,
stuff as well.
everyone.
We will contact you later. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Goodbye.
thank you.